Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was chosen by Athena, goddess of strategy? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Owl at Dusk. The monument breathes with the village. You don't hear it until you sit on the stone face of a dead hero and stop trying to make the day do anything but end. The roofs below scatter sunlight like tossed coins. The market lanes pull long shadows, and all of Konoha settles from clamor into talk. Naruto sits with his knees drawn up, orange sleeves pushed to his elbows, watching it happen, how the fruit sellers roll up their mats in the same order every evening. How a pair of genin always race across the bakery awning even though the tiles will crack someday. How patrol routes ripple along the walls like a heartbeat that never quite slumbers. An owl lands on his shoulder as if he'd been expecting it. It is small, mottled, bright-eyed in a way that feels awake in places he's never had to name. The talons are careful. The beak flicks once toward the village and once toward him. Then it lifts, turns a lazy circle, and goes. Yeah. He says to no one, grinning. Me too. A gong strikes from the mission tower. 3 quick beats. 1 long. Fire. He doesn't stand so much as lean forward and let gravity get the first move. He runs down the stone cheek, hops the carved chin of the first, and kicks off into air with a whoop that the wind steals. The slope drops away. He hits the branch of a pine, bends, flips, catches a banner pole, and lands on tiles already hot from the day. Smoke spools blue over the rooftops in a string line pointing toward the old crafts district. By the time he sees the street, it's chaos. 3 buildings at least, one of them a wood and brick tanner's shop that might as well be a box full of kindling dipped in oil. A woman with 1 sandal and a bleeding elbow is standing in the road screaming a name over and over. Children cry like sirens. A water cart is stuck sideways in an alley. The rickshaw pole jammed between 2 windows. Naruto doesn't think about being noticed. He doesn't think about anything at all. He breathes once, shallow, and the world tilts, just a nudge. Not a voice, not a revelation. A nudge, as if somebody slid a finger beneath all the possible futures and raised one edge up so he could see which ones would fall off first. 3 hand seals and 10 Narutos slam into the street. One of them calls to the woman with the bleeding elbow. Tell me exactly how many people are inside the tanners and point at the room. 3. No. 4. She gasps, eyes pinwheeling. My boy is. He doesn't let her drown in it. Point. She points. 2nd level, left side. The window with the cloth awning already on fire. 2 clones wheel the chair cart into the alley and kick the rickshaw pole until it splinters. 2 more form a bucket line from the nearest well. 1 clone runs along the roofline with a coil of rope. Another spreads a heavy tarp between the street and the door to catch falling debris. The real Naruto wedges a plank under the tanner's warped front door, squints through the smoke, and goes in low. Heat punches his face like a friend with bad timing. The smoke eats the air and spits it back as soot. He sucks a breath through his teeth and tastes salt, old leather, glue. Byakugan. He hears the word, soft and clear, behind him. And then Hinata's hand touches his back. He feels the touch like an anchor dropped. I can see them, she says, already moving. 1 adult in the stairwell, injured at the knee, 2 children at the 2nd floor south window. And someone small in a storage cabinet. No, under the table, west corner. Her voice hums with strain but stays steady. The beam above the stairs is cracked. It'll go if anyone heavier than me takes it. He doesn't turn. He doesn't have to. The tilt pulls again. He barks 3 orders in a row to his clones without looking, and they move like he's already told them twice. He gestures Hinata forward. You're the feather, he says, and slides past the stairs to the hall. There's a man trying to be brave and bleeding too much to pull it off. He's wedged under the broken banister, pupils blown wide. Naruto plants a foot, gets leverage, and heaves the banister up just high enough to drag the man clear. The wood groans. A crack runs along the beam like a lit fuse. He feels it about to pop. Hinata, he says, not loud, not urgent. She is there. She slides under his arm, her hand flashing in precise arcs. Gentle fist touches thumb against the beam in the air. Crack doesn't heal. That's not how wood works, but something in the frame listens to her and holds a breath. Go. She doesn't ask, she tells him. I'll float the load. He grins at her through smoke-black teeth and goes. The children are a knot of fear with feet. They scream the second they see him and then they don't, because he crouches to their eye level and says, I'm Naruto. We're going to play a game called Step Where I Step. And if you do it perfectly I'll tell you the stupidest joke I know. They nod, staring at his forehead protector like it's a miracle and also a mirror. He hustles them along a wall, tapping with 2 fingers before every step. He can feel the floor. Not with chakra, with same as a drummer hears the next beat. Some boards want to break if you ask them wrong. He steps where they won't. Halfway down the hall, a door bangs open. A figure rushes out coughing, a scarf tied across their mouth, a blade in hand that is too clean for a tanner's shop. Naruto doesn't break stride. He dips his shoulder, catches the blade hand with his forearm, turns his hips, and throws the attacker into the wall. The knife clatters. The person tries to hide their face. Their scarf slips. A latticed brand on the jaw. Not a Konoha mark. 2 more shapes move in the smoke at the end of the hall. Not panicking. Not screaming for help. Set, coiled. Hinata. Naruto says, the joke gone, company. She glides into the hall and doesn't stop moving. 2 fingers flick, and the first attacker's chakra coils shudder and go quiet. She flashes a glance through the smoke. Byakugan pulse, D speaks like a surgeon who has already cut wires at ankle height. 4. And there's a child under the west table still. You can reach him if you kneel and, now. He drops before the wire. A blade hums where his throat was an instant ago. He snags a small wrist from under the table and pulls a spiky-haired boy into his arms. The boy is coughing and snotty and stubbornly trying not to cry. Naruto tucks him against his chest and turns to leave. A weight shifts. The groan is worse this time. The cracked beam lodges and then tears free in a way that sounds so much like 1,000 broken promises he wants to spit. The hall doesn't collapse, it decides to. The world tightens down to a narrow corridor of falling things. Naruto doesn't have enough hands. He has just enough intention. Something in him, that tilt, changes from suggestion to line. He doesn't weave a jutsu. He doesn't do anything a textbook would bless. His fingers sweep the air, as if pulling taut a string you could only see if you were listening. And the tearing motion of the beam pauses for a half beat, an impossible hiccup in how gravity likes to talk. The beam shudders in that half beat, gives him 1 step's grace. Go. Hinata's voice. She has her hand under the man in the stairwell again, shin bleeding now, eyes bright as a forge. He goes. He doesn't waste the gift he doesn't understand. He swings the smallest child over his shoulder, grabs the 2 others by their sleeves, and sprints along the wall while the beam remembers what it was doing. Splinters spray his cheek. A shard of something kisses his temple. He feels a sting and a warmth. The owl tilt in his eyes flickers, and his head snaps just enough that the falling chunk of post meant for his skull glances instead. He'll have a bruise, not a hole. They burst into daylight. The world re-expands into color. Blue tarp, brown buckets, red faces, Hinata's lavender jacket smeared with soot. The alley is a wind tunnel of shouting. A clone he sent to the roof drops a rope like an argument ender. Someone's grandma is cursing him in 3 languages and blessing him in 2. He passes the children to trembling arms and spins back inside. The man at the stair is a sack of pain. Naruto gets under his arm and takes the weight. The stair complains at the combined load. Angry, I told you. And Naruto tells it, out loud, I know. 1 more time. They make it to the door. The man stumbles into the street, collapses into the mud, and starts sobbing the way you do when you've stopped holding somebody else up. Hinata comes last, stepping backward, eyes on the ceiling, palms out. The beam gives up the game, crashes, and drags a shower of sparks across the hall. She's already outside when it finishes. Naruto doesn't stand still. He looks up. 3rd roofline, he says, pointing past the tanner's shop toward the line of workshops. Somebody's there who wants to see the fire do their work for them. Hinata's focus shifts without any visible break. 2 somebodies, she says. 1 with a scroll case. They're moving east. He nods. I'll cut them off. Wait, she says, and he hears the voice she uses when she's decided she's not an extra. You won't see the wire on the second roof. I'll clear it. Meet you at the kiln. He doesn't argue. It isn't gallantry, it's math. He touches 2 fingers to his temple, thanks, and bolts. Smoke claws up around him as he runs. He drops kicks off a windowsill, lands on a barrel, and clears a narrow alley in a handful of steps. He can feel the path before his foot finds it, as if the roofs themselves are whispering where they end. For a dizzy moment he sees the route drawn across shingles and pigeon droppings, a chalk line only he can read. He hears feet ahead, soft, practiced, wrong for any villager who belongs here. He crests the edge of a workshop roof and catches a dark scarf and a glint of lacquer as a figure rolls through a tumble and pops up running. The scroll case bangs against their back. Another figure clears the gap to the tannery and then doubles back, too late, because Hinata appears out of their blind spot and doesn't kick them. She touches their shoulder and taps a point under the arm with 2 fingers, gentle and wrecking. The body learns regret and lies down on the roof like a tired dog. Naruto throws himself at the runner with the scroll case. He doesn't draw a kunai. He doesn't need to. He cuts across their angle instead of chasing the tail, gives himself a half step the runner hasn't planned for, and clips the trailing foot. The runner stumbles, rights themselves, and sprints again, but now the distance is closing. Naruto plants, pushes, and does the stupid, glorious thing, a body check midair over the alley. They both crash into a lattice of lines. For a heartbeat he thinks he's hit some new kind of trap. Then the scent of soap and rice and sun-warmed cotton smothers his thoughts, and he realizes it's laundry. A dozen white sheets snap in the fire wind, and the runner is in the worst corner you can be in when you need to run, wrapped like a half-unrolled scroll. Naruto uses the bounce to twist, gets his feet under him, and pins the runner's wrist against a rooftop rail. Someone whistles low. Please tell me you're paying for that line, a voice calls from the next building. I spent an hour getting the knots just right. Tenten is standing on a low parapet with a coil of spare rope across her shoulder, a whistle still between her teeth. Her hair sticks everywhere like she lost a fight with static, and she's grinning like a cat that wired the piano to the doorbell. I'll take it out of the village hero budget, Naruto says, breathless. What budget? She says, hops the gap, and scoops the scroll case with the ease of a market thief. Hi, you look like you belong to someone else's payroll. She flicks the lacquer. And you smell like cheap seal paste. The runner hisses behind their scarf. Up close, Naruto can see a tag tied inside the cuff of their sleeve, black lacquer with geometric cuts. The same lattice he saw branded into the jaw of the guy in the hallway. Not Konoha. Not any village mark he recognizes. Something meant to be seen quickly in smoke and with fear. Take it easy, he says quietly. You light fires in my village, you answer questions in my village. They try to headbutt him. It's not a bad headbutt. He ducks. It grazes the brie, DGE of his nose and makes his eyes water like a sad onion. He sighs and slides 2 knuckles into the runner's wrist, pressing a point that kills the hand for 20 minutes. They go boneless. Hinata ribs and secures ankles without looking like she's trying. Tenten peers into the scroll case and whistles again, lower. Ledger, she says. Names, payments. Someone's been buying antiquities and ritual scrap for months. And they've got a symbol. See, a sort of hollow circle with crosshatch through it. Pretentious. Hinata draws in a breath. That mark is on 3 of the wards pinned near the fire's origin. Ah, Tenten says. So not an accident. People are still screaming below them. Naruto doesn't get to rest in the satisfaction of a neat catch. He binds the runner's elbows with a road that already has a quick release built in for medic ease. He's learned that the hard way, and hands the end to a clone. Turn them over to the patrol at the fountain and keep their head covered. I don't want them seeing the safe house. Tell Izumo to smile exactly twice. The clone salutes and is gone with the captive in a sweep that stays low and fast. Hinata gives him a look that feels like a cool cloth on the neck. You have a safe house already for today. I have a list of places I'll check if I ever need to pretend I had a plan, he says. Come on. They move. Tenten goes with them without discussing it. She walks like she owns every rope she can see and half the ones she can't. Naruto drops from roof to roof, crosses a narrow lane on the ribs of an unfinished awning, and settles Finn alley into a quiet street where a tiny shrine to household gods crouches behind a potted maple. He kneels and pries up the floorboard everyone forgets, because the board has a knot in it that looks lick. A cat and people love stories about cats. Beneath the board is a box that would be ridiculous if it weren't perfect. Brass hinges, smell of cedar, inside lined with faded cloth. He doesn't know why. He expects it to feel like a pulse when he sets the scroll case next to what's already inside. It does. The bronze shard he found in the tanner's shop is ugly, which he likes. It's the size of an ounce. Stretched hand if your hand had been hammered into a shape that wasn't sure it wanted to be a hand anymore. It hums, low, not in his ears, in the place in his chest that tenses when a plan is wrong. When his finger brushes an edge, the hum tightens, and in the hum is the faintest impression of a woman's profile. No, not a picture, a sense of a profile, as if a statue's gaze fell into a puddle and kept seeing anyway. Observe, something says, and he has the sense that it's not words so much as a suggestion of words. Decide, act, hey, he whispers. Hinata kneels beside him, the light falling across her hair in a way that makes him dangerously aware of how close she is. Tenten crouches and fans herself with a sheet of paper. The smoke reek drifted with them like a loyal dog. You feel it, Hinata says, not a question. He nods. It's like, nobody's going to make the call for me. That's called being an adult, Tenten says. Horrible, I know. Shish, Hinata says gently, though she smiles. She looks at Naruto like she's mapping a floodplain and planning where to plant trees. He slides the shard into the cedar box. The hum goes from persistent to exhale. It isn't content. He doesn't know that it ever will be content. But for now, in a quiet street where somebody's laundry smells like home and not like fire, the shard lets itself be put away. Seal, Naruto murmurs, and traces a quick, clean link array across the wood. Nothing fancy. No lying to the world that it will kill anyone who touches it. A declaration. This is safe. This is watched. They replace the board. Hinata's hand lingers on the floor a breath longer than necessary. He wants to ask her what she saw when she used her eyes in that hall, what she sees now, but the question is too big for one afternoon. How did you hold the beam? She asks instead, when it should have fallen. Ask me again when I know, he says. It felt like I talked it into reconsidering. Tenten gives him a side eye. That is not how beams work. Don't ruin the metaphor, he says. They step out into the lane. The air is cooling as evening finally admits it's here. Kids run past barefoot, coal smudges on their noses. Somewhere a shamisen place. A song that wants to be sad but isn't allowed yet. The fire is mostly out. The tug of war is over. Now there will be counting. Naruto, Hinata says softly. He follows her gaze downward. There are slips of paper pasted to the threshold of the shrine like leaves stuck by dew. He didn't see them go down, and that more than anything makes cold walk his spine. The ink is still wet in places. The script is neat, efficient, as if the hand that wrote it would be the last to shake after a killing. Each slip has the same hollow circle with cross hatch. Tenten crouches and peels one up carefully, like it might bite. The paper is heavy, woven through with fiber that isn't quite cotton. There's a second layer of ink beneath the visible message, seal work not meant to flash and impress but to sit and keep sitting. Hinata reads the top line. Her mouth compresses. Say it, Naruto says. He doesn't want to give the words his own breath. She tilts the slip so the gold of the sunset catches it. Vacate the god, she reads. This village will not host contagion. Tenten's laugh has no humor in it. Subtle. Naruto looks up into a street that is absolutely ordinary, old man sweeping, cat on a wall, sun slanting, and thinks. That's how this will happen if we let it. A paper on a door. A word like contagion. Fear that smells like civic duty. Who do they think we are? He says. Hinata doesn't answer immediately. She folds the slip in half and then in half again. Her eyes are calm. I think they know exactly who we are, she says finally. That's why they're afraid. He turns the folded paper in his fingers. The ink rubs a little onto his skin, staining his fingertip with a cross-hatch shadow. He remembers the runner's brand. He remembers the ledger. He remembers the way the beam hung for him like a jury, not like a miracle. Decide, the hum in his chest suggests. It is not a command. It is an invitation to stop pretending the choice belongs to the next person up the chain. He decides. We don't scare easy, he says. Conversationally, as if remarking on the weather. He tucks the folded slip into his pocket. Tonight we sleep. Tomorrow we talk to people who need talking to. And if anyone wants to paste a paper on my door, they can come try. Tenten shakes out her arms like she's about to start a fight and hopes to avoid it. You want me to stick around? She asks. Looks like your day just moved into my neighborhood. Quote, please, Hinata says, before Naruto can. Your ropes are useful, and my charming personality, Tenten says. That too, Hinata says, deadpan, and Tenten blinks. Then barks a laugh that makes two kids look over and copy it without knowing why. They walk back toward the center of the village. The sky is a deepening cobalt with an orange wound at the horizon. On that will heal separately from the smoke. Patrols move like chess in the distance. Already the story is being written. Who ran where, who saved whom, who started what. An owl passes over them, low, and catches a current that doesn't seem strong enough to hold it. It banks, catches another, and another. Naruto watches it find the shape inside the air that was waiting to be flown. Hey, he says, and Hinata glances over. He gestures at the sky with his chin. You ever feel like there's a note you almost hear before the music starts? She considers this, then nods. I think that's what it feels. Like to choose something you'll have to live with. He smiles without teeth. Yeah. They reach the broad street by the fountain. Azuma looks up from where he's supervising a knot of unhappy, cuffed men and gives Naruto exactly 2 smiles. Evenly spaced, like he got a memo. The runner is hooded. The scroll case is already on its way to the tower with a SEAL team. Someone has found the Tanner's OL. D-Dog under a bench and coaxed it out with a piece of sausage. Naruto checks the sky one more time. A breeze shifts. He can almost see lines across the rooftops again, the routes someone might take to paste a paper on a door without being seen, the corners where fear likes to turn. The hum in his chest is quiet now. Not gone. Waiting. It doesn't say it will solve anything. It never promised that. It seems very interested, though, in what he'll do next. Let them watch, he says under his breath. Hinata doesn't ask who he means. She stands a half step closer. Not touching, not a declaration, a simple geometry. Tenten spins a length of rope thoughtfully and ties it into a loop that could catch a wrist or a falling bucket with equal grace. The village breathes. He breathes with it. The day fin. Ally gives up its last bright coin to the night, and somewhere over everything, small and bright-eyed, the owl turns circles as if drawing an invisible plan none of them will ever see on paper. When Naruto goes to sleep, it's the kind you earn. When he wakes, the papers will be on more doors. Tonight, they hold. Chapter 2. River of Glass. By morning the papers have multiplied like an idea that learned to use shoes. Every lane he turns down wears them. White slips stapled to thresholds and shop doors, on the posts of public wells, on the low walls where old women sit to peel beans. The ink is the same, efficient hand. Hollow circle cross-hatched. Some are torn already, crumpled under heel, or stuck with a smear of egg from a breakfast thrown in annoyance. Most remain. People read them in STR. Aiden their backs as if they've been asked to be good. Hinata doesn't touch any of the slips as they walk, but he sees her eyes take in each one. The Byakugan isn't necessary. You don't need special sight to track fear that dresses up like duty. Don't pull them down, Naruto says when a genin reaches for one near the bakery. The kid freezes, fingers in the air. Naruto unsnags a thread from his own sleeve and gives the boy something else to do. Tie these around the drainpipes and make a neat line. If anybody asks what you're doing, tell them the Hokage told you to keep the water from pooling. Make yourself useful so you don't have to be loud. The kid blinks, then grins and bolts. Hinata's shoulders ease by degrees that only someone who knows her well would see. At the tower, the ledger from yesterday's chase sits on a lacquered tray, still damp from steam the archivists used to unfurl the scroll without cracking the paste. Inked columns march in tidy order. They list artifacts, ritual scrap, bronze fragment, owl-headed token, then amounts. Then destinations coded by river mile markers. Tenten leans on her elbows, balancing on the heels of her palms like she's trying not to contaminate anything with her weight. It reads like honey to a fly, she says. The way you'd list THNGS if you wanted your enemies to be sure they'd found the right pile. Naruto taps a fingertip lie. TLY where the numbers jump for seemingly worthless items. These lines are wrong on purpose, he says. Not clumsy. Deliberate. A throat clears. The door frame is all angles, and Ino manages to make leaning in one of them. She's in a simple gray kimono with her hair up, a cluster of tiny glass vials pinned at her collar like a brooch that might inconvenience anyone trying to hug her. She's already smiling, because she came in mid-conversation and it pleased her. Good morning to my favorite arson investigators, she says, steps in, and takes the tray from under Tenten's nose as if she was invited. I heard about the fire. And the papers. And the charming new fan club you've acquired. She squints at the scroll. Her voice loses its sugar. Ah, the hallowed null could at least hire a calligrapher with style. They want the opposite of style, Hinata says. They want to be obeyed without being noticed. Well, Ino murmurs, scanning. This column points up the hot springs river. If I re a serious buyer with pockets for old gods, I'd launder my purchase orders in the same place people already wash away inconvenient things. There's a barge 3 miles north of Yugakure that floats between jurisdictions. Technically it's a floating bathhouse with card tables. Practically it is a church to pretending we're all better dressed than we are. Naruto lifts his head. You've been there. Professional curiosity, Ino says. Which in her voice could mean anything from, I tested their perfume, to, I taught 3 of their dealers to lie slower. She taps the column again. Names to collect, faces to match, and they'll have a ledger that actually matters, something you only carry if you're very sure nobody's going to read it except the person you think is on your side. Tenten turns her head just enough to catch Naruto's eye. You're going to ask us to go on a boat, aren't you? The last time I went on a boat, Hinata says softly, almost to herself, was when I was 10. I threw up into the wind and it all came back. Ino clucks. I can brew you something that will convince your body not to be dramatic. Or we can keep you mostly on the upper deck in the wind. Either way, Naruto. She lifts her chin. You look like you've already decided you'll go. He hasn't said the words yet because saying them makes it different. The tilt in him is a steady pressure, not a shove. The papers on doors will multiply either way. The ledger will travel upriver either way. Ignoring it would be called prudence by someone with very clean hands. We go, he says. His clones scatter to sort errands before he gives them. One heads to the outfitters, one to the river port, one to the kitchen to ask a retired cook for a pot in which you can hide a scroll because nobody thinks to search a stew if the smell is right. He doesn't tell Hinata to sit this out, because she won't, and because he requires her eyes the way you require the edge of a blade not to lie about itself. He doesn't tell Tenten that ropes will be useful on a boat. She's already coiling. Ino, he says, tell me how we walk in. You, she says to Naruto, wear quiet cloth and a smile that looks like it loses small amounts of money with graceful resentment. Tamari, he says. But Ino is already talking into a different part of the room. We'll be on the top deck at sundown in a green sash she doesn't like. Shish. He'll say she's only here for Suna's tourists, and then beat 5 men at dice and make an enemy she can use. Tenten will be my assistant with the oils, and Hinata will be an heiress who gets seasick and wants the good tea room anyway. If anybody asks, we are all, to different degrees, disappointing our families. Naruto glances at Hinata. She meets his look with a tiny shrug and the ghost of a SMI. That says she can carry any role that involves politely refusing to be moved. Tamari might not be there, he says. She will be, Ino says with breezy certainty. She told a friend of a friend DB, visiting the steam to see how diplomacy smells. That's how she talks when she wants it to be repeatable. Tenten props her chin in her palm. And how do we get the ledger? Ino reaches into her sleeve. Pulls out a threaded needle already wet with a clear film that scents the whole room like rain on copper. We make them bring it to us because they think they're searching us, she says. G.I. Pay me 2 hours to build a scent line through the boat. After that, if someone touches a specific lockbox, I'll smell it. If someone sets hand to the kind of clasp that Ledger deserves, I'll smell that too. As long as the wind doesn't change and the kitchen boy doesn't dump a vat of sesame oil between us, which he will, because gods love a laugh. The Hokage approves the mission with the sort of measured expression that means, I see what you're doing, and if it goes wrong I am prepared to defend you out loud. On their way down the tower steps, the old man from the lane with the bean peels cat chests Naruto's sleeve without looking at him, as if he expected Naruto's arm to be exactly where it is. I know who pasted those papers, the old man says to the heir. He didn't look angry, he looked tired inside. That's the kind I worry about. Naruto nods. He doesn't say that the exhausted ones are the best at following a script until it puts a knife in someone and calls it a handshake. He doesn't say anything. He keeps walking. The river locals call the barge the Laughing Willow because the original owner planted a sapling in a floating trough at the bow and told anyone who would listen that he'd married it. 2 decades later the tree's roots lace the prow like an old woman's hands, and silk lanterns hang from the branches so the barge looks at dusk like a traveling festival that found a mirror and fell in love. The decks are lacquered cherry. The railings are rubbed smooth by fingers that learn to lie there. Music rolls out in waves. Gentle shamisen near the tea rooms, riotous flutes near the gaming tables. And the background chorus of 100 people almost getting what they think they want. Ino goes first. She walks up the gangplank with a lacquer case in her hand and the right expression between superior and supplicant. The hostess bows deeper than is necessary at the sight of a Yamanaka seal on the case. The boat likes expensive scents because it knows how to charge people to smell like things you can't keep. Appointment, Ino says, making the word sound like a favor. My client is particular. Tamari is on the top deck exactly where Ino said she would be, in a green sash she doesn't like. She's leaning on her fan and watching the river like it contains a joke she plans to explain to it later. Naruto sits at the table nearest her and requests a drink. He can afford without looking like he cares that he can afford it. Hinata takes a tea room with perfect near view of the stair that leads to the office corridor. Tenten fades into the staff so easily. You can see the bones of the barge's hull through her. In an hour you'll swear she's always worked here, and that she's the kind of person you're sure you don't see. They don't speak with lips at first. Ino passes once and sets a bottle on Naruto's table with a ribbon tied too tightly. He tugs the bow loose and the ribbon falls in a loop that signals 2 guards at the office, in their alphabet of befores. Hinata tilts her teacup and the reflection in the glossy black surface shows a corridor ghosting with shadow as if it leans when you don't look. Tamari, without shifting her gaze, thwacks the fan against her calf 3 times. Pauses, then once more. Patience, idiot, Insuna finger talk, which Naruto has learned exactly well enough to pretend to take offense. Temari's enemy arrives at Sun. DWN wearing a waistcoat that would only look good if you had 3 more shoulders than a human usually gets. He flourishes dice like a priest showing relics and he laughs too hard at losing and even harder at winning. Tamari beats him clean twice and cheat corrects him a 3rd time so publicly that he has to thank her. A 4-man shadow becomes a 6-man shadow and the hostess's smile gets tighter but doesn't crack. Where are you from? Tamari asks the enemy in a way that suggests she knows and wants to confirm how he'll lie. Everywhere that matters, he says. So nowhere you can say out loud, Tamari replies. She lifts a cup and drinks like a queen scarred by bending winds. Do you ever leave other people's floors? She asks, and the table howls with delighted discomfort. That's when he looks sidelong at Naruto for the first time and not by accident. He's been losing perfectly, not ostentatious, not invisible. The kind of losing that keeps a dealer in place and a table relaxed. When Tamari lets him see she's seeing, he lets her see him lose 1 more coin and then chooses to win with an expression that says he's sorry to break the rhythm but he found an edge with his hand by mistake. She smirks just enough for him to know she saw him find it. You're not here to make friends, she says when the table resets. I'm here to make sure the right people owe me small things, he says, then adds. Because he might get only 1 shot at her respect, and I saw 3 men at the bow check their knives the moment you made him sweat. Her smirk warms by 1 degree. Good. Maybe you're not terrible. The vault corridor isn't really a corridor. It's a trick played by the architect and the owner and the mirror maker. They paid too much. Glass panels slide in and out of the walls in slow W rhythms keyed to the movement of the river current. It looks harmless and expensive, which is the worst kind of trap. They go at midnight. Ino leaves a decoy perfume case that smells to anyone with a nose like, "This is the important case," and takes the real important case down the servant's stairs. Tenten hums a work song under her breath and nobody hears because their brains have been taught that that sound is safe. Hinata walks with the unhurried glide of a girl who is sure she'll own everything she can see in exactly the way that won't get anyone killed. Naruto steps into the mirror hall. And it is like walking on the surface of a river that has decided not to be water. Reflections of himself and of the three women beside him cascade and slow and multiply. He sees a version of himself with his head turned too far toward the glass and understands in his bones that if he looks at his own reflection at the wrong angle, the panel will swallow him and he will keep walking into a plaque that goes sideways until he doesn't come back. Do not look directly at the corners, Hinata says, low, as if the walls can hear their own edges. You can feel where the panels come and go. The seam is warmer. She breathes shallow. And he knows it isn't fear. It's discipline. Ino clicks her tongue once in an unmusical way, their signal for, listen. A breath later he feels it, a thinness in the air ahead, like a thread pulled taut. The barge designer put a trap wire where nobody would think to put a wire because who wires glass? Tenten palms a coin, flicks it, and the coin skates on nothing, hits the wire, and drops. She mutters, "Oh, cute," and takes a tiny mirror from her sleeve. She angles it at a blade that lives in the ceiling only when the river heaves a certain way, and harmlessly eats its glance. How many? Naruto asks. 4 wires, Ino says. 2 blades. 1 section that will close if you breathe too big. Got it, he says. Small breaths. Follow my feet. He doesn't make them match him. He makes them anticipate by half steps, so if he misreads a rhythm, they fall into a second path he's already chosen. The panels slip, the corridor compresses and opens like a lung. At the worst point, Hinata catches a panel with the barest brush of her fingertip and convinces it by touch to hesitate. At the same breath, Naruto's chest tightens, the tilt again, the edges of possibility lifting, and he places his foot on a seam that feels wrong until it's right, his center of gravity pulled by a pattern of reflections that doesn't go for his eyes but for his inner ear. They cross into shadow that smells like money. The office is quiet, quiet like prayer, not like sleep. The wall behind the desk is a shrine to locks. Not heavy ones, clever ones, artistic ones that make a person proud of their own vanity when they solve them. Ino doesn't take her case out of its hiding place beneath the neat coil of her sleeve because she doesn't need it yet. She stands still and lets air talk to her and then breathes the part of the air that knows where it has been. Left cabinet, she says. 3rd slot. There's a lock there that smells like someone who calls himself careful. Tenten is already there. She touches the cabinet in a lover's way and sighs approvingly. Oh, you're pretty, she tells the lock, and Naruto has to look away because it feels private. He doesn't hear the ward until it's scolding him. It flares against his shin, a harmless slap, because he stepped where the person who wrote the ward wanted him to step. Hinata's hand is on his jacket cuff and she pulls him a half step backward precisely into the space where the ward becomes a bored doorman again. They're nested, she whispers, almost amused. Like onion and onion. If you cry, the seal wins. Tamari walks in. She isn't subtle about the way she arrives. She lets the room see her. The wind that trolls her fan smells like cedar and iron. It isn't chakra, not exactly, it's the confidence of a who is used to working in rooms where everyone assumes her presence is a courtesy. I was bored upstairs, she says. And your man at the dice table had blue chalk on his index finger, so he wasn't just bragging, he was counting, badly. She folds her fan and plants herself against the wall as if the structure will sag without her shoulder. Good timing, Ino says, delicately rude. Hold this are closed with your not chakra for 15 seconds if I tell you. Not chakra, Tamari repeats. You're adorable. She listens once, catches a seam in the air where drafts slide, and sets a wind in that seam without ruffling her own hair. The edges of nearby papers don't move. Naruto inhales and feels the pressure in the room relocate into a place that isn't between his ribs. Tenten opens the lock, like a friend who was always going to leave you for someone with better shoes. The ledger sits where it should, bound in good leather, corners strengthened with brass. Tenten touches the brass. Her face changes. "Don't lift it yet," she says. "It's wearing something." "What kind of something?" Naruto asks. "The patient kind," she says. She makes a tiny circle over one corner with her fingertip. He room smells for half a heartbeat like cold water on hot glass. There. If we'd lifted it, the clasp would have pinched, and our hostess would have been handed a little bell under her desk that says, "Come see me make money from fools." Tenten smiles without teeth. "We can still be fools. But it will be our choice." Ino draws breath to say something clever, and that's when the world in the room changes. It doesn't go dark. It goes simple. Naruto feels it first like a polite hand on the back of his neck pressing his head down, inviting him to look at the floor. The hum that lives near his sternum dulls to felt instead of song. The space inside his head where the tilt walks becomes flat. Ino inhales and chokes on nothing, startled. Hinata's eyes cloud the way a pond clouds when someone PS a pebble into it and then reaches in to stir with a stick. Tenten shakes her hands out as if they've fallen asleep in bad posture. Temari straightens, every line in her posture turning into a line you could hang laundry on. "Well," she says, "someone's turned down the world." Naruto puts his palms on the desk because he needs the friction. He recognizes the feeling from the smoke in the tanner's shop and the papers on doors and the efficient handwriting. The hallowed null have a way of making everything narrower. "You smell that?" he asks Ino. "It's nowhere," she says, voice thin. They've heated a dampening field over the office. "No, it's moving." Her eyes flick left. It's expanding. From the corridor, a footstep. Calm, not hurried, not cautious, the footstep of someone walking through motionless air in a room that belongs to them. A man appears in the doorway wearing a black coat that has never had to learn to bend. He is not dramatic. He is exactly the height of the door lintel without ducking. His face is long, his mouth decisive, his eyes ordinary except for the fact that they do not register surprise when they land on 5 people in a room that should be empty. "Good evening," he says pleasantly. He glances at the ledger in Tenten's hands and then at the place where the ledger was. "We were going to invite you to talk," he adds, "but you've saved my secretary the trouble of composing a note." Nobody moves. Temari yawns in a way that shows respect to no one. Tenten laces her fingers together as if to check that they still belong to her. Ino's hand drifts, casual as a cat, to the pressure pin at her collar that will release a scent if she pulls it. Hinata looks down once, briefly, and when she lifts her gaze again, Naruto knows she has counted people in the hall. Way without liking how much effort it cost. "Do you have a name we're going to pretend is your name?" Naruto says. The man's smile could have been born on paper and adopted by a face. "Konzo," he says. "Administrator, Hallowed Null, Hot Springs office. I hope you've enjoyed the music." He gestures toward the ledger, courteous. "And thank you. Picking it up saved me the trouble of proving you touched it." Temari's wind leans harder into the door. The latch clicks against nothing, resisting a pressure from the other side. Temari doesn't break eye contact with Konzo. "I can hold this for a minute," she says. "Maybe 2. Then I'll get bored." Konzo's eyes slide to the fan, then away, not interested in being impressed. "You're very good with rooms," he says. "You make them want to keep their shape." "You're very good with lies," Temari replies. "You make them want to pretend they're warnings." He inclines his head as if someone said, "Sir," in a tone worth answering. "You'll agree this is softer than letting your friends' connection go unmonitored." He means the shard. He means the hum in Naruto's chest and the way the beam listened. He means Athena without knowing he means her name. Naruto keeps his hands in plain sight. He doesn't reach for a weapon in a room that has already decided that will be clumsy. "Your papers call us contagion," he says. "But you chased a child with a knife through a burning building." We can argue about definitions, but one of those things smells like nerve and one of them smells like rot. Konzo's gaze flickers, not with shame, not with anger. With the recognition that he's been told the wrong story about who will let him finish a sentence. We're preventing collapse, he says. I respect your village, and your, he gestures with a hand so minimal it could be error, talents. But Kagaya tore the sky once. We're not in a hurry to hand it back to anyone's mother. Hinata moves before he finishes the last word. She doesn't attack. She changes the shape of the room by 2 centimeters. She steps so that Naruto can see what she sees if he decides to move. It isn't dramatic. It's useful. Ino's thumbnails press the release on 2 vials. The air occurs a hint of bitter citrus that Kanzo probably won't register until he remembers it later and thinks of a song he can't name. Naruto doesn't ask Kanzo to stand aside. He isn't the kind of man who stands aside because someone asked. He is the kind who thinks he's saved lives today. Naruto understands that because he feels that way too, and he knows how to talk to it. How many people burn? Naruto asks quietly. When you paste papers on doors. Kanzo doesn't answer, but for the first time his gaze slips. His quiet could be anything from contempt to uncertainty. It's not nothing. That matters. Door. Tamari says, teeth not showing. Naruto, stop talking like you want to convince someone and tell me what to break. The corridor behind the office goes into the kitchen, Hinata says, eyes unfocused, breath steady. 3 staff. 1 guard. The guard is bored and checking his paper slips. The staff are not actively plotting to kill us. Perfect, Ino says. I hate killing the staff. They overcook the noodles for a week when they're scared. The ledger is too heavy to carry and too tempting to abandon. Naruto makes the decision it wants to force. He doesn't keep it. He flips it open, rips the binding, and scatters pages into a stew pot Tenten pulled from nowhere. It looks obscene. It looks like a body being dismantled without ceremony. Then Ino breathes into the pot and the scent of beef and star anise and onions leaps out like a dog that has always loved you, and the ledger is a recipe you'd only suspect if you were rude enough to sniff another person's dinner for politics. Out, Naruto says. Tamari opens the door like a curtain. The pressure on the other side gives and a guard who thought he had weight behind him staggers in, eyes wide with the shock of finding a wind where his plan should be. He lifts his baton and Hinata takes it from him with emotion that looks like she's apologizing. Ino breathes as if she's complimenting someone's tie and the second guard in the hall decides to think about a different corridor for just long enough that he misses catching them. They move as a knot through a boat that is trying very hard to remain polite. The kitchen staff sees the stew pot and only registers the stew. The cook shouts something about putting it where it belongs before it cools, and Tenten obliges, setting it on a back burner nobody bothers with at midnight. Kanzo follows, unhurried, as if he has all the time in the world to watch people he intends to catch later. The dampening field travels with him. Naruto can feel it now, like a light behind a door that hasn't been opened yet. It eats the hum. It makes his aegis flicker sulk. If he tries to rely on the tilt alone, he will trip. Glass corridor will be crueler on the way out, Hinata says, voice steady. And the fact that it is steady makes his ribs loosen. The panels have been told to close when someone moves like they want to leave. If we move like we want to go deeper, they'll let us go. So backwards, Tenten mutters. My favorite. Temari's wind hushes, waits for her, listens. She lets it go in bursts rather than a steady stream. Ino slides them into places where eyes aren't looking. Because she's made those eyes want to look at something else. There's laughter behind them that isn't theirs, a laugh Ino left in the air like a decoy rabbit. Kanzo doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The field radiates. The staff, without deciding to, ease out of the way like a room makes space for rain. They hit the mirror corridor and Hinata moves first. It isn't because she's brave, though she is. It's because if the panels want intent, she can give them a shape to misunderstand. She edges into the first seam not looking at the glass at all, eyes on the opposite wall as if the opposite wall had told a joke only she heard. Naruto follows at her shoulder. The trick on the way out is to lie about direction without lying to your feet. Halfway down, the barge lurches against a current that wasn't a current a second ago. Smebody upstream opened a sluice to flush a channel. The panels stutter as if they're thinking too hard. The field pressing against Naruto's spine suddenly stiffens. Exerts enough weight that his heel slips an inch off the seam. His arm brushes glass. The panel accepts a hair of him and tries to make a shape of it. A knife flashes. It isn't a shinobi's knife. It's a chef's knife. Ugly and excellent, with a nick off one corner that gives it personality. It comes not from the corridor, but from the kitchen where the cook saw someone trying to steal a stew. And followed indignation down the hallway. The cook is broad and fast and furious for reasons that have nothing to do with gods. He swings the knife because somebody is taking his pot without leaving money. And in the world he lives in, you take a swing at that. Naruto doesn't have a clean block. He has his hands, the tilt smothered to a murmur, and a friend's win to borrow. He leans into Temari's smallest breath of breeze, changes his weight on it like leaning on a friend's shoulder, and the knife goes past his ribs instead of into them. It scrapes along the ledger's brass corner hidden in tea. He stew like a bell being rung underwater. Hinata steps from behind him and catches the cook's wrist before his anger can reload. She doesn't hurt him, but she shows his joints a map they forgot they knew. The knife falls point first, sticks in the seam where a panel was going to close, and holds it ajar as if a stranger's temper just saved their lives. Sorry, Naruto says to the cook, because that's the correct shape in this moment. You'll get your pot back. And a story. The cook blinks, sees nothing like the truth of what is happening, and will retell this as a funny thing over late-night rice. They step through the knife-held gap into a section of corridor that is suddenly real again. The field presses harder now, annoyed at being inconvenienced by people who keep refusing to build tea. Air lives out of the pieces it hands them. Konzo's reflection appears in 3 panes at once, long and neat and ordinary. He watches without malice. Do you know what you're protecting? He asks conversationally, his voice carrying without being raised. Or are you only protecting the fact that you chose it? Both, Naruto says, and doesn't look back. Outside, air that isn't rehearsed hits his ace like a friend who doesn't make you perform. The upper deck thrums with music, the lanterns flicker, and a quiet shimmer in the air tells him Ino has seeded scent lines through the railings and IR ropes like a girl tying ribbons in a lover's hair. If anyone moves the ledger to a lockbox that matters later, she will know it even if she's 3 towns away. Tenten takes a handful of blank Betty. Ing slips from a tray by the door and shreds them, dusting the flakes into the stew where they go unnoticed. Paper hides in paper. Temari's enemy at dice spots them and goes gravity still, a man Learny. Ing that knights can change genres without asking. His 6-man shadow becomes a 3-man shadow because 3 of his men have opinions about chefs with knives and the way women from Suna bend rooms without bothering. Hinata breathes slow. The boat no longer pretends innocent. It grumbles as if remembering it floats on a river that eats. They make the gangplank. The hostess arrives too late with tests that can't be called protests to avoid being an admission that something is wrong. Ino shatters a vial on the wooden floor as they step off. The scent of turmeric and clove leaps up and draws a crowd an inch to the left for just long enough that Temari's wind can come home to rest. On the bank, night stands. The river is a stroke of ink with stars salted on it. Reads hiss, a frog announces he owns this part of the world. Naruto doesn't turn his back on the gangplank until every foot he is responsible for is on dirt. Don't run, Ino says, almost cheerfully. Let them think we stole a stew. Let them think we were bored. Let them think anything that stops them from yelling the word you can never take back. Which word? Tenten asks. Crusade, Ino says. They walk upriver where darkness puts a hand on their heads and says, hush. Hinata shakes once from the adrenaline letting go, and then the shake goes through her like water through reeds, and she is still again. Temari keeps pace, clicks her tongue once in pure annoyance. I wanted 5 more minutes at the table. The man in the waistcoat would have cried. You can come back next week, Ino says. We'll even let you win honestly once just to confuse him. Naruto keeps his eyes on the river. The barge drifts away 3 boat lengths and then anchors again to collect its dignity. Music tries to decide if it wants to keep playing. Somewhere a woman laughs in a way that sells expensive drinks. Did we get what we came for? Hinata asks, not in doubt but to make them say it. We got where it goes next, Ino says, tapping her nose. If the ledger breathes near a certain kind of lockbox in the next 3 days, I'll feel it where I stand. We also told them what we smell like when we're hunted, which I didn't prefer, but there we are. She glances at Naruto. They used a dampener I haven't felt before. Not chakra null, story null. It made everything literal. Hinata nods once. I don't want to feel it again. You will, Tamari says, not gently but not cruelly. It's the kind of honesty that saves you once later. They've decided you make them look irresponsible. They're not all villains, Naruto says. I didn't say they were, Tamari says. I said they've decided. The path upriver is a narrow tongue of packed earth that curves between rice paddies like a snake that's learned to carry light. They don't light torches. The moon does its best. A dragonfly strafes Hinata's head and decides it doesn't want to get involved. The night smells like warm mud and weeds and the iron tang of the barge's anchor chain. Tenten hums a tune. Ino harmonizes with it under her breath with a descant you wouldn't hear if you didn't love her. Tamari stops walking for one heartbeat and tips her head, listening to something that isn't the wind. Naruto opens his mouth to ask and then closes it. He doesn't have to make everything into a conversation. They crest the low bank that looks down at a sandbar and stop because the river below them is no longer only a river. Lanterns on poles have been set in the shallows. They stand like a procession, their reflections partially broken by current. Between the poles, men in armor T shines too red even in moonlight stand at attention on platforms driven into the riverbed. The platforms are too regular to be fishing decks, they are parade ground segments hammered into water. At their center, raised on a plank rostrum, a banner lifts into the night. It is simple, crimson field, a spear through a laurel crown. It's gallingly beautiful, the way violent things sometimes are when they borrow symbols that meant something before. The banner catches the light and throws it back like a promise. The men below do not number many, but they move like a whole. When one adjusts his stance, 5 others adjust the way a body does when you shift your weight in your sleep. A man stands before them, bareheaded, broad-shouldered, his cloak clasped with a coin of red stone. He is not in a hurry, but nobody there is bored. What is that? Tenten says softly, more to the air than to any of them. I don't like it. Tamari exhales through her nose. A military pageant, she says, but her voice is thinner than usual. Someone practicing a story about who they are so it will be easier to tell later. Hinata's hand finds Naruto's sleeve and rests there as if to remind his fabric not to stand up on its own. He's watching, she whispers. The man on the rostrum lifts his head. The distance should make it impossible to tell if he sees them. He looks at them anyway, the way you look at a horizon to see hat weather becomes. He doesn't bow. He doesn't lift his hand. He doesn't need to identify himself. Naruto doesn't feel the tilt so much as the absence of the river thinking about them. The hum that had gone quiet in the dampening field stands up. It doesn't roar. It doesn't hand him a plan. It hums in the way of a whetstone under a blade. Ryuma Shidachi, Ino says, very quietly. Like a teacher holding a student's wrist while they draw a letter. They call him the red standard out past the border where men drink anger because there's nothing else to fill a cup with. He used Obi very good at persuading people to charge the wrong hill. Now he's very good at making them believe the hill charged them first. You said his name like it's a story you read, Tenten says. ISM.L'd his name on a coin 3 months ago, Ino says. And then I didn't smell it again for a long time, which is also a smell. The men in the river don't shout. They don't pound spear on shield. They lift their weapons once, in silence, and hold them as if the silence itself is a wall they're pleased with. Ryuma's gaze moves on. He doesn't keep them. He turns his head toward the far bank where the barge's lanterns bob. Amused as a little city. He looks at money and makes it look briefly embarrassed. Go, Tamari says. There's a point past which standing and watching becomes a conversation. She flicks her fan open and closed once, restless. And I do not want him to think we came here to meet. Naruto takes one long breath. He files the banner under the part of his brain where Danguro's things he will have to talk to later wait. They walk deeper into the dark, and the lights on the water behind them burn like eyes that have decided to learn names. They make camp in a fallow field an hour from town and do not light a fire. Tenten throws down a sheet of oiled canvas and calls it a floor. Hinata wraps herself in a quilt that has seen too many missions and too few evenings that smell like fried fish. Ino lies on her back and lifts a glass vial up to catch the moonlight, watching how the liquid bends the world around it. Temari doesn't sleep. She stands with her fan resting tip down and watches the way the grass moves when there's no wind. "You're coming with us," Naruto says to her without looking up. It isn't a question. He says it like he's telling the river what it already decided to do. "For now," she says. Her voice is not unkind. It isn't close to warm either. "I want to see how far the Null thinks it can push a village for the sake of a story about safety. And I want to see what kind of shape that red man makes when someone asks him to stop." Naruto nods. Those are good reasons. He doesn't ask her for more. She wouldn't give them, and he doesn't need them. Hi, Nada shifts so that her shoulder touches his in a way that could be accident if you wanted to pretend. He doesn't. He lets the contact exist and does not make a speech about it. "What's the plan?" Tenten asks the sky. "Follow the ledger where it goes," Ino answers, eyes still on the vial. "And when it arrives somewhere that smells important, be there first. Also, teach the cook a better stew so he will tell nice stories about us when the Null asks." Temari snorts. That last part is actually wise. Naruto rolls onto his back and watches the stars arrange themselves into formations that don't care who's counting. The hum under his breastbone is quieter here in the field where everything is old in the way of dirt. He speaks into the grass. "I don't like fights that end with one man dead and a speech about how necessary it was." He says, "I like fights that end with a lot of people home at a dinner table. If that makes me soft, I can live with it as long as the table is full." "It makes you troublesome," Temari says dryly. "But sometimes trouble is the only thing that keeps systems honest." Ino turns her head, glass catching the angle where Hinata's profile becomes fierce. "It makes you a general who likes mercy," she says. "Which is the only kind of general I'll work for." Hinata doesn't say anything. Her hand finds his, palm to palm, fingers lacing not like lovers but like climbers before a rock face. The warmth between their palms sits there, sensible and steady. The quilt's edge rustles when she settles again. Tenten murmurs something about mirror polish and coil diameter, and then goes from awake to asleep like a knife sheathed right. The owl comes toward dawn, when the grass has learned to pray with dew and the world is a blue bruise thinking about light. It doesn't land. It circles once and follows the river toward a bend where the bank cuts the water into a blade. Naruto doesn't reach for it. He doesn't ask it to mean something. He lets it be a bird that happens to love the hour that hurts. He stands, breathes, and counts the papers on the doors in his head without panic. He thinks of Konzo's ordinary eyes and Ryuma's banner and the cook's knife saving them by being put down at the right angle. He thinks of Hinata's hand on wood that listened when she asked, and of Temari's wind's patience, and of Ino's vial bending the moon. He thinks, "We can plan a walk. Why through this that isn't a straight line? When the sun clears the ridge, he's already walking." Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. The labyrinth eats sound. They follow the river until it thinned to a stony vein, then cut inland where the hills learned to stack. The land beyond the last rice terrace forgot about softness. Rock shouldered into sky, pale and cracked like old knuckles. Wind came down gullies, in knife-edged drafts even when the sun said it shouldn't. Every footfall wanted to tell on them. It wasn't hostile. It was honest. "This is what I am," it said. "Make your peace or make your plan." Ino felt it first, the way a scent splits a crowd. She stood on a ridge with her eyes half closed and lifted her head as if the air were an instrument and she'd just tuned to it. "Ledger's breath," she said. "Old paper, brass, and someone who eats bitter melons to feel righteous." "The Null," Temari said, "dry as the stones. Or a monk who lost a bet." Hinata's gaze traced the lines of the hills. There as a smallness to her posture that meant she was seeing far, not shrinking. "There's a hollow ahead," she said. "A bowl. The rock has been worked." Tenten squinted. "Worked how?" She had a seal bundle slung across one shoulder like a carpenter with favorite chisels. "Like a throat," Hinata said. "Swallow-shaped. They found it in the next fold of land, an oval sink, ringed by sandstone-like stacked plates, all leading down to a cleft just wide enough for a man with a bad opinion to wedge through. The air there had the same taste as the hallowed Null's papers, something careful laced with a stringent purpose. On the inner wall, Someone had inked a single clean circle with cross-hatching. It had been applied with a steady hand and the kind of brush that doesn't forgive. Vacate the god, Tenten murmured, reading phantom words that weren't written here, just implied by the mark in her head now. I'd like to vacate my breakfast into their boots. No vomiting on opponents unless strategically vital, Naruto said lightly. And the joke did what it was supposed to do. Slid them sideways into motion instead of into a thought loop. They went single file at first. The passage swallowed sound in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural, a trick borrowed from deep caves and taught to shallow stone. Their footfalls muffled inside an arm's length. Ino snapped her fingers as they moved and frowned when the snap didn't carry. It fell 10 inches away like a tired bird and died. The labyrinth eats sound, she said, soft, sharing not to spook them but to set the rules of the room. It will be interested in taking anything we try to throw too far. Keep your messages short, I'll give you a line when you need it. Naruto touched his chest in the place where the hum lived and felt it Rico. Nice the architecture the way a good rival recognizes respect. The tilt wasn't louder here, but it was easier to feel. Possibilities stacked like stones do when a patient hand builds a wall. The core. A door widened and then stopped pretending to be one. The floor lurched down a series of uneven steps into a chamber crusted with obsidian growths, owls carved from glass dark stone, each no larger than a fist. Perched along the walls on tiny ledges. You could see yourself in their round eyes. When you did, Naruto felt the room shift a fraction, like a chessboard nudged by a knee. Tenten hissed when she almost looked straight on. Don't, she said, catching her own chin with 2 fingers and redirecting it toward the floor. They're keyed to line of sight. The panels underfoot will pivot if you look the wrong way. Peripheral only, Hinata warned. The veins at her temples stirred with Byakugan focus while she kept her head slightly down, the way a hunter watches without reading his threat. The floor moves in rings. The outer ring wants to spin us into a cul-de-sac. The inner wants to lift if someone too heavy steps on it. I'm insulted, Tamari said. I step light. Prove it, Tenten muttered, but there was a smile in it. Naruto breathed once and let the pattern rise out of the static. The owls didn't care about fear. They cared about attention. He tugged a strip of cloth from his sleeve and tied it low like a visor, shading the top quarter of his sight. Watch the corners with the corners, he said. Feet on seams, not tiles. Ino. She met his eyes and didn't bother with theatrics. Mind phalanx light, she said. Voice pitched to the middle of his head, not the room. The world took on a faint second outline, the way you feel a person behind you before you hear them. A gentle triangle formed between him, Hinata, and Ino, another with Tamari and Tenten, lines laced between. Thoughts didn't spill across, intent did. It was a hum of ready notes, not words. Don't look at the owls. Tenten sing-songed under her breath, deliberately off-key to keep herself honest. They moved. Naruto didn't make a show of leading. He angled his feet into the rhythm the floor wanted to punies. And then asked it to consider a different cadence. Step seam, half turn, weight low. The outer ring rolled under them and then beneath, slowed. Hinata's fingers brushed the edge of an obsidian perch as if greeting a skittish animal. The stone stopped twitching to show off and paid attention instead. Tamari rode the slightest inward gust to carry her weight toward the inner ring when it tried to frown under her foot. Tenten palmed 2 palm-sized metal discs, mirror-faced seals she'd embossed overnight, angled them toward the wall, and let the owls catch their own reflected stare. It was petty and effective. A section of floor locked dumb as the system considered itself. They cleared the chamber like you clear a room of smoke. Not with one big gesture, with a dozen small, right ones. When they reached the far lip, Hinata let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I can taste my heartbeat, she said. It's ridiculous. It's the anatomy of a good bar fight, Ino replied. But for floors, the labyrinth narrowed again, then bled into a ledge that balked anyone who liked certainty. The ledge sketched around the edge of a shaft, open at the middle like a throat. The air from below was cool and restless, a low hum rose from it. Not mechanical, architectural. Bridges, 3 of them, arced across to a twin ledge on the far side, each at a different height. The lowest was broad and cracked. The highest was a delicate lattice that didn't look interested in forgiving. The middle one belonged to a person who hated choices. Naruto liked it immediately. Silence, Hinata whispered, and crouched. Below, on the far side, men in armored coats walked along the ledge with long polearms. The spears carried not blades but two-pronged inked heads, paper charms fluttering near the wrist. They planted one into a joint between stone slabs, and the hum in the air tugged toward stillness like a cloth caught on a nail. Seal lancers, Ino murmured. They'll punch holes in the way we talk to each other. And they'll be very disappointed that we use words and not moans. Tamari counted the positions. 3 on the far ledge, she said. 2 more up on the highest bridge, setting poles at the anchors. They're building a moderation cage. Quote, translation. Tenten asked. By the time we cross, we'll be the worst versions of ourselves, Tamari said. Too literal, heavy-footed, joyless. It's a tactical insult. Let's be rude back, Naruto said, and felt the tilt choose a route. He broke the team with his hands, quick and clean. Hinata. Front. Bait that isn't bait. Let them think they can triangulate you. Tamari. Give me precise gusts. No floods. Kiss knees, not chests. Tenten. Mirrors to bend the pole glances. Ino. He looked at her and didn't have to say more. Eyes in the back of your head for the group, she said. No monologues, just taps. And if the floor lies? Tenten asked. Then we lie better, Naruto said. It wasn't a joke. It got them moving. Hinata stepped onto the middle BR. Ijin shifted her weight in a way that made the bridge trust her. It was nothing mystical. It was body knowledge, learned and relearned, the grace of someone who doesn't fight materials to make them worthy. The 2 seal lancers on the far side looked up, not immediately alarmed, professionals at their job who had an expectation of being bored. One lifted his pole to plant at the anchor closest to Hinata. Temari's fan turned an inch. The wind found the man's ankle and wasn't a push so much as a question posed to his balance. He faltered a quarter step. The pole head scraped stone and didn't bind. Tenten's mirror kissed the pole with light and the charm burned its own ink out trying to bite something that wasn't there. Naruto went high. The top bridge felt like a bad idea with good manners. He picked his steps on the joints. Not the boards themselves, let his weight land on his forefoot and skim off. Below, Ino's intent tapped the base of his skull. Left ankle, 8 steps, hinge on his right, watch the 4th after that. He smiled without teeth and didn't look down. The seal lancer on the top bridge saw him in profile and decided to take dignity's shot. There is a way a man plants a pole when he has been told he is the reason civilization won't fall. He set the prongs with a prayer in his wrist and shoveled ink at the air. Naruto felt the pressure gathering, the way walls do just before a storm. He stepped into it like you step into a friend's push in a doorway and borrowed the momentum. Aegis flicker skinned across his ribs when the other lancer swung, reflex shield, not flashy. Making a fatal blow an inconvenient graze. He let the second prong squeal along Tenten's mirror as she slid it between them and then bodied the lancer into the safety rail before safety could object. The man's breath went out of him with a noise like a sincere apology. Hate to be late, Anko said. Her voice arrived before she did. Rai, from the shadow under the highest bridge, where the ledge bit deeper into the wall. She slid up onto the bridge and over the rail with the charm-eating grace of a thief invited by the house itself. She wore the kind of black that isn't trying to be invisible. It's trying to be mistaken for a well. Her eyes flicked over Naruto, saw the flicker's telltale shimmer under his shirt, and her mouth did something that wasn't flirting so much as a promise to be rude when convenient. But your friends were getting braver than they're built for. Good to see you too, Naruto said, breath short, honest about it. Anko's gloved hand snapped, and a thin line saw ing from her sleeve to the planted pole on the far ledge. It bit not with metal but with clever NK. The charm at the lancer's wrist flared and then sulked into dead paper. You all owe me a drink, she said. Preferably something that doesn't taste like righteous self-denial. Hinata danced 3 steps that made the center bridge love her and then pivoted in a way that pulled a lancer's eyes in the wrong direction. Temari's wind lifted a paper scrap from the beam. Nothing, just trash, and spun it into a bright distraction at face level. Ino's intent line sent the note. Drop now. Naruto dropped. He lancer's pole head whooshing past his shoulder into air that was already broken. Tenten slotted an Aegis mirror along the bridge rail. the next thrust chased its own echo and met nothing but embarrassment. The fight didn't last long. It wasn't a brawl, it was a test. The Null were experts at making rooms behave. They weren't prepared for a team that treated rooms like partners and opponents at once. When the last Seal Lancer on the lower bridge scrabbled for a grip and found only smooth stone where he'd sworn there'd be purchase, Hinata stepped in and tapped his forearm with precision. He dropped his weapon and kept his wrist. She released him with the same politeness she used to take it. "Who's the snake?" The downed Lancer wheezed as Anko reeled her line back through a ring and palmed the wire so casually it looked like she'd grown a new finger. "Tax auditor," Anko said sweetly. "Filing late. Where's your supervisor?" "W wouldn't tell you," he spat, then glanced at Naruto, took in the leaf forehead protector and the fact that Naruto wasn't gloating while his friends systematically dismantled someone's clever room. He reconsidered what kind of story he wanted his day to be. "Up 2 levels. He bit off the rest." "There what?" Tamari asked. "Working the failsafe," he said in a rush. "In case of intrusion." Tenten's jaw went tight. Failsafe. She hated the word for the way it hides its bite in its middle syllable. "Powdered stone flood," Hinata murmured, eyes gone distant. "There are sealed hoppers. If triggered, the dust will fill the lower galleries and," she didn't finish. She didn't have to. "Dust in a place that eats sound doesn't warn you twice." "Then we don't let them pull it," Naruto said. He put his palm to the stone wall, felt the hum tremble like a bowstring plucked. "Or we steal the pull." Anko slid a glance to him, amused and measuring. "You were always an optimist," she said. "Only on even days," he replied. "Is today even?" "Emotionally," she said. "Come on." They climbed through a crack in the ledge that Hinata swore had been a pencil line a minute ago. The labyrinth tightened around them in a way that wasn't about space so much as about will. The Null had been here long enough to tune certain sections to certain footfalls. Anko moved like she remembered where an old bruise lived on the wall. She touched a spot that looked like ore. Denary stone and a narrow slit shrugged into being. "Deep cover?" Ino asked, not with judgment, with "what's my next puzzle" in her tone. Anko's mouth ticked. "I've been listening to their sermon," she said. "They collect people with bad nights and teach them to feel brave about complicated fear. Some are decent, some are bored, some love rules so much they'll burn a village to save a legend about order. They think they're preventing collapse," Naruto said quietly. Anko's eyes flicked to him in a way. "Everybody thinks that," she said. "Right up until they pull the wrong lever." The gallery they entered wasn't grand. It didn't want to be. It wanted to be correct. Clean-cut stones, low beams, a central plinth with a pedestal and a glass case like the one that belongs in a museum that decide to specialize in objects nobody at the front desk knows how to describe without sounding like a fool. 3 Null administrators stood around the plinth with the posture of men who have practiced how to be unimpressed. One of them wore a coat with a black band stitched into the sleeve, rank or vanity, hard to tell. He had a calm face that creased politely when Anko came in as if she'd arrived for tea. "Kabuto," Anko said pleasantly, using a name that was not his. It was a test. He didn't take it. "Mitarashi," he returned, correct as a stamp. "What a coincidence." "Administrator," she countered, declining to help him make small talk into a trap. She lifted her hand, showed them it was empty, and then showed it again as if she'd almost decided to be less polite and then thought better of it. "Your failsafe's a mess. We prefer the term corrective measure," he said. His gaze moved over Naruto, Hinata, Ino, Tamari, and Tenten with the same consideration he might use for a row of knives. He admired the craft and assumed they would be used wrong. Whoever touches the case without the counter sigil suffocates their own courage first. "Is that what you're calling air these days?" Tamari asked. Tenten studied the glass and the plinth's lip. "There's a micro bezel that will catch skin oil," she murmured, delighted. "Someone loves their work." "We are careful," he said. "You were frightened," Hinata said. And she didn't say it to be cruel. She said it because she has lived inside fear and knows its handwriting. He blinked once. It wasn't offense. It was a small recalibration. Not talking to the person on the form I filled out. The relic inside the glass wasn't grand either. A palm-sized shard of bronze, edges jagged like a coastline, subtle patterning on its surface, something like scales, or feathers. Or the memory of both. It didn't sing. It set a place for a song if a song happened to visit. We're taking that, Naruto said conversationally, aware of his own heart. And the way Anko's weight shifted to her toes. And we're leaving before you pull anything that turns good men into gravel. You won't, the administrator said. Not because you can't. Because you don't know where it goes if you do. The last time a shard like this woke where it shouldn't, we buried a country with a woman who wanted the word, love, to behave. He gestured, minimal, the way Konzo had on the barge. And Naruto made a note anyone that tidy wasn't a coincidence. You think you are choosing compassion. You are choosing a kind of mathematics that ends in alters. We're choosing not to kill people we don't have to. Naruto said, math I can live with. Something in the corridor to the left hiccuped. Air shifted. The hum under the floor changed its mind. Hinata straightened, head canted. They pulled the lever, she said. Which lever? Tenten asked, but she already knew, because she felt it in her teeth. The administrator did not smirk. He didn't look happy. He looked like a man who would sign a piece of paper that kills a village and then skip a meal because there's no joy left to fill it. Correction, he said. It is already too late. Naruto's body chose before words did. Glass, he said to Tenten. She moved. A scroll snapped open in her hands, parchment whispering like a joke between conspirators. She slapped a square of paper to the glass case, ink unfurled in delicate circuits. A mirror pattern blooming and hardening. The case's locks hesitated. Tamari said, a slow wind circulating in the gallery, not to blow anything over, to convince dust to pause where it would prefer to swirl. Ino's mind phalanx tightened, the soft hum of intent turning into a wire hung from post to post. Dust didn't arrive as a wave. It arrived as a decision. A curtained hiss slid own the corridor and then the room understood it would be full. Anko, Naruto said, on it. She didn't ask what. She slithered along the wall, found the corrective measures release panel disguised as a decorative blank. And fed it a snake of her own ink. The panel spat back like a cat. Anko grinned like a bad idea about to become SMRT. Tenten, here. Tenten pressed a second mirror to the plinth's base, lacing it to the first with a quick loop of thread. I can buy you a heartbeat on the case, not two. A heartbeat is the exact unit we need, Naruto said, because the tilt had climbed his spine and sat behind his eyes whispering angles. The first dust kissed the threshold and hesitated in Temari's wind, caught between decisions like a man in an argument who forgot what he stood to win. Hinata put her palms to the stones of the doorway and closed her eyes. I can see where the dust wants to go, she said. Down the cracks, into lungs. Not today, Naruto said. He swept his hand roughed the air above the plinth as if pulling a string he had no right to touch, and felt something answer. The motion wasn't chakra, it was insistence shaped cleanly. The dust at the threshold froze in the strangest way. Motion stopped without becoming a sculpture. It held itself like a breath you take before saying yes or no. Now, Tenten breathed through her teeth. Naruto popped the mirror latch. Tenten lifted the case. Hinata slid her hands in and took the shard like it had always been meant for her to hand to him. The administrator took one step forward out of professional outrage and Tamar. Eyes Wind politely put a palm on his chest and suggested he reconsider. Anko's ink ate the panel's second thought. The corrective measure clogged on its own appetite, coughing dust back up the chute like a drunk friend. Naruto felt the Gorgon thread give. The line he'd pulled quivered, straining to hold in a world that insists on motion. Ino, he said, and she was already there. Everyone, feel the root. Her voice didn't echo, it folded into their chests. For a hot second the labyrinth's map didn't belong to stone, it belonged to Tenten's memory of the path they took and Hinata's sense of void. DS and Naruto's tilt teaching their feet which way not to die. Lines etched themselves in their heads like chalk. When the dust remembered it was dust and tried to race into throats, they were no longer in the doorway. They ran, not a panicked sprint, controlled speed, breaths counted, steps chosen. The mind link hummed quietly, a chorus without words. Tamari feathered wind not ahead, not behind, at ankles, keeping the dust low. Asking it friendly favors. Hinata's Byakugan touched corners from the corner of her sight and left them generous. Tenten slapped mirror seals at elbows, a reflected edge here, a siphon there. Buying micro moments. Enko threw a coil into a gap and made it a rope bridge like she'd intended the labyrinth to be cooperative all along. The shaft with the bridges boomed. The lowest one collapsed under the weight of dust blown wrong. A gout of gray belched upward, then sucked back down as if ashamed. Naruto saw the high bridge's last section shiver and knew it would snap if any of them landed wrong. He didn't say it. He angled his run so the bridge thought he was a lighter man than he is and then felt Hinata's hand touch his back, exactly the pressure his foot needed not to make the board complain. They spilled into the owl chamber just as the first thin fingers of dust found it. The carvings did not like the dust. They drank it and spat it and tried to make the floor misbehave out of spite. Tenten held up a mirror and the owls saw their own anger and had the good grace to be embarrassed for half a second, long enough. The passage to daylight refused to remember where it was. The labyrinth insisted on being an argument and was losing. Naruto didn't try to overpower it. He made himself very small and very certain and walked with his body the way he would talk to a scared child. Here, he told it. Not aloud, because this wasn't the kind of thing that wanted words. Here, we want out. We want to carry this out without breaking anything that didn't ask to be broken. The wind shifted. The hum changed key. The passage that didn't want to be a passage sighed, rolled its shoulders, and agreed to be one for people who asked nicely. They ran the last 20 paces into afternoon. They tumbled into light like a handful of bones and found themselves not being crushed. That was a decent surprise. Naruto hit his knees without ceremony, coughing stone out of his throat. Hinata doubled over, palms braced on the dirt, breath coming shallow and then deep as she dared. Ino lay flat on her back and laughed once in reflex at the sheer rudeness of having survived. Temari turned her face to the sky and declared, deadpan, too bright, as if criticizing decor. Tenten crouched, both hands cupped around the shard Naruto had half forgotten he was carrying because fighting for air narrows everything. When she opened her palms, the bronze looked unimportant again. Ugly, beautiful, honest about its corners. It woke, Hinata said, voice hoarse. It had, a little. It wasn't light. It was, attention. The shard wasn't a relic so much as a way the world remembered how to listen. Naruto touched its edge with a careful knuckle. The hum in his chest stood up like a patient dog catching footfalls at the door. Temari looked not at the shard but at his face. She was too old at being young to be fooled by objects. She saw the echo. That one's yours, she said. No flattery. A note in a logbook. Enko rocked back on her heels and whistled low. So Athena chose a loud one. He didn't ask her how she knew the name. You can smell a myth on people when you live around altars long enough. He let the word sit between them without ceremony. I've had worse patrons, Enko said, then shot him a sideways grin that chased the new weight out of the air. Also better pay. Sound that wasn't the wind ran across the top of the bowl like someone dragged a thumb around a crystal glass. Naruto looked up. On the ridge opposite the cleft, a figure stood, cloaked. He didn't shout. He wasn't the null administrator. He wasn't here to tidy. He stood like a man who knows how to be center in a rumor. The banner wasn't with him. It didn't need to be. He had the stance of a standa. Road, a posture designed to be read by 1,000 men from too far away. When the wind lifted, the cloak edge teased crimson at the lining. Naruto didn't wave. He didn't put his hand on a weapon either. Ryuma Shidachi raised 2 fingers. Not in salute, not in threat, in a hello you use with equals or people you intend to make equals by beating them properly. Then he set a round, bronze coin on the rock beside him. Flicked it with his thumb so it spun and sang, and walked away. Ino exhaled soundless. He's feeding us a story on purpose, she said. He wants us to think he's generous. Which means he's confident, Temari said. I prefer them cocky. They make mistakes with panache. Or he wants to mark this place and our faces as part of his play, Enko said. He's good at choreographing blame. Naruto stood. The dust in his hair made him old for a second. He shook his head and laughed once. We have something to deliver, he said, looking at the shard. And people to talk to who will call us fools. And a cook to apologize to. Quote, and a bath, Tenten said fervently. Fine, Naruto said. Bath, then diplomacy, then invent new ways to be difficult. They didn't make speeches about the day. They packed, drank water that tasted like the plainest miracle in the world, and started walking. Hinata drifted a half-step nearer than she had yesterday without comment. She bumped his shoulder GHTLY once when his mind went too far into the labyrinth behind him and brought it back to the path in front. He bumped back, gratitude not needing vowels. Enko fell into step at his other side, not quite part of them yet. The way a stray dog decides you belong to each other for one town and then sees about the next. She watched his hands the way shinobi do when they're choosing whether they want to learn someone's tells or teach them new ones. So, she said to the air, "You take in strays, only the dangrouse ones," he said. She barked a laugh. "Good, I'd hate to lower your average." They reached the ridge where Ryuma had stood. The coin was still there. Naruto picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. On one side, a laurel that wanted to be admired. On the other, a spear that didn't need to want anything to be itself. He closed his fist around it and the shard in his pack hummed once, a soft dissonance that would make a singer smile and then fix it. Not fear, a chord, a problem that could become music. "Let's go," he said. They went. At dusk, when the hills let the wind come down without sharpening it first, the shard in the pack warmed like a stone left near a kitchen stove. Naruto slipped it out and turned it in his hand. Not light, again, not noise, a clarity. The surface caught the sky and didn't reflect it, it held its own picture. For a breath, the bronze showed a plane of ground not like any ground here, flat, packed earth scored with straight white lines in a grid no farmer would draw. Men in crimson moved like one body on it and stamped their feet until dust rose in perfect squares. Ryuma walked along their front as if measuring the space between their hearts. Naruto let the shard return to bronze. He didn't push, he didn't beg, he put it away. He slept, with dirt in his hair and the scent of stone in his nose. He dreamed of owls that refused to move unless you winked at them out of the corner of your eye. In the morning, they were all a little quieter than usual. Not heavy, measuring. They found the river again by noon and a village with baths that kept secrets and a noodle shop whose cook had opinions about stew thieves. Naruto paid for all the noodles in a pot big enough to absolve sins. The cook glared and then taught him how to cut scallions with less blasphemy. It took 5 minutes and removed a small, stupid weight from the day. The null had not yet pasted papers here. They would. If the hallowed null asked, the cook grunted, "I tell them you smelled like cumin and didn't tip worse than average. I am a fair man." "Thank you," Naruto said solemnly. "We will endeavor to earn promotion to above average." They made a corner table a headquarters. Hinata laid a map down and inked 3 lines lightly, her hand neat, no flourish. "If Ino's scent hook is right, they'll move a set of smaller ledgers upriver to the land of iron," she said. "They'll want neutral ground for the next argument. Which means swords and cold," Tenten said. "And engineers who think feelings are a type of squeaky hinge." "I like them already," Tamari said. Enko sipped tea and watched Naruto's face when he wasn't looking. "There's a hole in your epics," she said idly. "Where are your gods when rooms eat sound and bureaucrats bury men with corrections?" Naruto didn't look at the ceiling for answers because he doesn't pray like that. He set his chopsticks down, met her eyes, and answered human. "I think the point is we're still here," he said. "And so is everyone we pulled out of today's bad idea." Ino clinked her cup against the table to make a noise just for them. A little chime the labyrinth couldn't swallow now. "To bad ideas done precisely," she said. Temari's fan thumped his boot lightly beneath the table, a wholly unnecessary correction to posture that doubled as affection. Hinata's knee brushed his. Tenten unfolded a new mirror seal and began etching lines into it with a tool as fine as a whisper. On the way out of town, an owl followed them to the far field. It didn't land. It drew a lazy shape in the air like a plan you can't draw on paper without ruining it. Naruto swung his pack and felt the shard against the cloth and the sea. Oin against the other side and the hum between them like a heartbeat deciding who it wants to be when it grows up. He smiled into the wind, not bright, not brave, the exact amount a person smiles when they like what the day promises to let them fight for. The road turned. They didn't stop. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Flags in the storm. The plateau looks simple from a distance. Flat, wide, a place to breathe after the hills. Up close it's a liar. The ground tilts by degrees that don't show unless you're carrying weight. Wind comes from two directions at once and then takes it back. Thunder walks the long spine of sky, counting its own steps. They pick up the convoy at noon. 2 ox carts with iron-banded wheels and canvas sides, a smaller wagon with a broken spoke already brown from repair. 6. Civilians who do not want to be brave and are anyway, a land of iron courier in layered armor that smells of oil and rain, and 3 hallowed null observers who insist they are neutral, which is a STR. Ainge word for men who paste warnings on the world. Somewhere in the last town, someone wrote, "Vacate the god," on a prayer flag because the wind would carry it farther. Naruto had not torn it down. He had watched it flutter and then he had gone to work. He walks the carts like they're puzzles. He wraps rims with knuckles. He slides a hand under axles. He crouches to see the ground through spokes and checks where mud will try to win. He doesn't tell anyone what he's doing. He moves the smallest cart to the rear because it's quick enough to be a decoy. He puts the ox carts in a stagger so they can trade wind the way runners do. He laces rope between 3 wagons in a way that looks like a mess and isn't. If one tips, the others will pull it upright long enough to curse and keep going. Tenten wa, tches him and starts to smile, the at last smile of a craftsman watching another craftsman get it right. When she sees what he wants, her hands pick up where his leave off, tightening knots, checking pins. Sliding a mirror into a place where it will see without being seen. Hinata walks the line, one slow pass. Her Byakugan sketches the plateau under the earth. Density shifts where rock knuckles up. Voids where rain has taught the ground to remember rivers it doesn't have right now. Her palm presses to a calf here, a cart frame there, a shoulder there, making small adjustments that people obey without knowing they're obeying. She talks to a girl with a mud-smeared nose like the girl is a teammate. When the girl finds a laugh, everyone within 10 paces breathes easier. Ino arrives from ahead with dust on her hem from running. She outsmarts her own hair with 2 pins and a loop of ribbon and makes a needle look like jewelry. 2 clusters of men behind a basalt bulge, she says, as if reading gossip off a fan. The smell is military, but not ours. Ironed wool, boiled leather, and a touch of clove covering old blood. They look at the sky when thunder walks, like it's a drum roll for them. Also, her eyes flick at the null observers without acknowledging them. Someone laid too much chalk in a line across a low dip. It wants to pretend to be an honest road. Don't believe it. Tamari squints at the horizon. The wind toys with her sash and then stops when she asks it to. Storm's not here yet, she says. But its little brothers are running ahead to check-ins. Enko's boots are dusty and amused. She flips a small braided length of inked cord over one finger with a motion that would get her thrown out of a church in 3 counties. I left ink snakes in 3 culverts, she says. They'll bite paperwork, not people. When the null decide to call an emergency, the forms will eat their own tails for a minute. It's the nicest thing I've ever done to bureaucracy. The null observers watch like they're making a list of petty crimes to forgive when it buys them something important. The eldest, a man with tidy hands and the exact posture of a desk, clears his throat. Our mandate requires. 3rd cart, Naruto says. Not looking at him. You're riding it. Stay with the courier. If we call cold, you do not improvise. The man blinks, offended at being told while not being seen. Temari's fan taps once, twice. Against her shoulder, a lazy metronome that says yes, his is the conversation you're getting. Hinata doesn't offer apology or commentary. She adjusts the rope on the smallest cart like the air has an idea and she intends to correct it. Naruto feels the plateau tilt again. Not physically. The other tilt. Edges of paths raising for him like changes in light underwater. Possible futures stack and fall. He breathes once and chooses an opening move. Convoy chess, he says. Nobody echoes him. They just move. They leave the last brush behind and step into a space the sky insisted on. The field wants to be cavalry flat. The wind refuses to agree, tugging them sideways. The first part goes easy. It's meant to. The plateau lets you believe you'll get across before you understand it's a room with 2 doors that close in the same sentence. The attack doesn't start with a shout. It starts with a ripple. A line of men rises from a shallow swale like grain deciding to be soldiers. Their formation is crisp without being fussy. The man at their center carries a spear the way some people carry a song. He doesn't try to be tall. He is tall. When he lifts his free hand, the red banner catches wind that wasn't there a moment ago, which can only mean it has better friends than weather. Ryuma Shidachi looks exactly like the rumor, which is a choice. The cloak, crimson-lined. The calm, a quiet that's been sharpened for a stage. The way he moves so the men around him feel their own posture correct. The hallowed null observers don't move. One goes very still, as if someone just told him the fire is on the other side of the door. Naruto takes one step forward into the place where his choices matter. Standard bearer, Tamari says, as if naming a cloud shape so everyone will agree. He's going to ask you to make this about him. He's going to ask me to make it about me, Naruto says. Which is worse? Ryuma lifts his spear in greeting, not salute. He walks until he's in a voice's throw and stops, not because he ran out of room, because that's where people will notice he's stopped. Uzumaki, he says, like the vowel is a coin. He has the voice of a man. Who could talk a village out of a harvest simply by convincing them to be proud of starving gracefully? You move like you've learned what runes want. You move like you've taught them, Naruto says, conversational. Like men in a noodle shop discussing the price of fish. Walk your people out of the way, Ryuma says, glancing at the carts without contempt. Let our quarrel be clean. I have no interest in their bodies confusing the arithmetic. Clean arithmetic is a ghost, Naruto says, and feels the hum in his chest nod once. Ryuma's smile is what you give a child who hasn't yet learned about winter. That is what men who can't endure blood tell themselves, he says, mildly. He lifts his spear in a small, perfect arc that signals a shift to someone on his left. The line of men behind him tightens. What comes up out of the ground to either side is not exactly chakra, not exactly memory. It's formation given shape. A phalanx appears where there wasn't a phalanx, a ghost company in bronze, shields round as moons. Spears like sentences that don't care if they're true because they're so well written. They are beautiful. That is the danger. Ino breathes in softly, a note against her teeth. He builds the story out of blood given, she says. The more it spills, the clearer the lines. Fury formation, Tamari says. Every fall in a radius tightens the next strike. Which means, Anko adds. Amused and irritated at once, we win by making sure they don't get what they're hungry for. Naruto makes decisions. Tamari, he says, I need crosswind at 40, cut in pulses. We're going to lean while we pretend we don't. Tenten, triangle grounders. Find the iron veins, give lightning a better opinion. Ino, mind phalanx, simply enough to share directions blind. Hinata, your R map. Call Tenketsu by rhythm, not words. Anko, do something unrepeatable to any pole that looks like it wants to tell the story for us. He doesn't look at the null when he says it. They're already moving toward a low rise to watch. If he thinks of them as people to save, he'll waste moves. He meets Ryuma's eyes. We'll take your duel, he says, and change all the rules. Ryuma's eyebrows flick, not with annoyance, with curiosity. That would be new, he says. Naruto points behind him at the canvas side cart with the slow oxen. My terms, he says, and speaks quiet enough that he has to want to be heard. No civilians in the field. No formation crossing the line where the ropes hang white. If anyone on either side falls and breath finds them still here, they will be carried out before we spend another breath. If you win, you get to be proud. If I win, you let my people go. We both know you can ignore the second condition. I am asking you in front of your men if you want to be the kind of leader who has to. Ryuma listens without looking patient. He knows the value of a clean stage. He also knows when refusing a small mercy will cost him a dozen larger ones later when the field remembers. His eyes cut toward the red banner and for a heartbeat he looks like a man who has spoken privately with a god and found the conversation inconvenient. Very well, he says. We will give the fallen to the living. He lets his gaze flick to the null. Even yours. The wind goes thin for 1 second as if it wants a better seat. Tamari quirks her mouth and the gust returns with manners. Tenten, as already calling stakes in a triangle around the convoy, her seals unrolling in lines of brushed ink. Aegis mirrors mounted low, their faces turn to the sky so any bolt that comes down can be asked to leave. She hammers one stake with the heel of her palm and mutters to it. The ground answers. Ino's mind phalanx threads them together without drowning anyone. It feels like a hand at the small O. F the back and the memory of a metronome. Hinata's eyes bloom pale and sharp. She breathes so steady it could be boring, which is the most beautiful thing in a storm. Enko walks like a woman riding, no, on the ground with both feet. She pouts a null silence pole and smiles before she breaks it in half with a motion that looks like a greeting. The first clash is bodies and storm. Naruto doesn't sprint. He glides to the forward line and then increases speed like a man testing ice he already knows will hold. Ryuma shifts weight and the ghost phalanx moves like a hinge. Spears angle, shields rise a hair. Naruto throws 3 clones forward and wants them to be seen. They die with satisfying efficiency. He uses the heartbeat after the first one pops to slide into the space where that death was supposed to feed the formation and plant a heal. Temari's crosswind kisses his shoulder. He leans into it and the second spearhead glances off his aegis flicker with a sound like a loaf of bread being slapped by an impatient ant. 2 paces left, Hinata's rhythm taps in the mind phalanx. Now 3 shallow, then drop. Her voice never sounds breathless inside the link. It is the voice of a purse. On who refuses to lie while people are counting on her. He drops and the spear above him chases the echo Temari placed instead of his throat. He rises into a guard break that would never work on Ryuma. And works perfectly on the man to Ryuma's right, whose stance is beautiful and lazy at the same time. Naruto doesn't hurt him more than necessary. He ruins his rhythm hard enough that the ghost on the man's left sees it and twitches imperceptibly out of key. Ino's note. Right blind. 10 steps. He doesn't question. He fights a man he can't see for 3 breaths and the mind phalanx gives him a picture made of intention instead of sight. A blade angle wanting to be too proud. A guard position too practiced to be honest. He moves when the other man expects a feint and gives him a palm heel T. Hat won't kill him, wrist not to be stupid for a week. Ryuma arrives then. Not a rush, a presence. His spear slides in on a line most people don't think to look for because it isn't glorious. Naruto meets it flat. The wood hums. The 2 lines of story, Athena's and Ares, touch through human bones and do not explode. Ryuma's eyes brighten a fraction. Not a duelist, he says, approving in the way a man is approving when something rare enters his collection. A commander who insists on walking the line himself. Don't break. It's better if you don't break. Naruto answers with a parry that changes angles twice. You could spend the blood you're holding back right now, he says, because the man likes honesty. You won't. The arithmetic becomes vulgar, Ryuma admits, and their weapons chatter. In a pattern that would make a drummer weep. Besides, and here his voice softens by a degree that would be invisible if you didn't already know to look, I prefer courage to take more shapes than one. Lightning crawls along the underside of the clouds like a cat deciding whether to drop. Tenten's triangle hums and then hooks a bolt that would have picked the smallest cart purely out of spite. The aegis mirrors redirect the strike into the ground with a thud that echoes in knees and teeth. A civilian screams one fine, honest scream and then clamps both hands on the edge of the cart and doesn't do it again. The null observers jump like men caught cheating at cards and look offended at the sky. Enko's ink snakes do more work than credit will allow. A silence zone tries to unfurl under Yuto's feet and finds a mouthful of its own sigil. It folds like a letter sent back to its author with, "Return to sender," written in a rude hand. Enko tosses a wink in the general direction of the Uro. Aaron goes to pull someone else's mistake out of someone else's boots. Then the Fury formation shows its mathematics. A red-cloaked man on Ryuma's left takes a cut across the thigh and goes down hard. The ground makes a choice. The spectral line brightens, thickens, shoulders widening. The next spear thrust comes like a promise that learned how to keep itself. The strike hammers Naruto's flicker and eats 3 fingers of his breath. Another man, one of the null lancers who decided to prove neutral by being brave, overcommits and gets caught. He drops, and the formation cheers without smiling. The third fall is a civilian tripping into a rut. No blood, just a knee-driven wrong, and the ghost shields knit like mouths closing before a lie. No, Hinata says over the link, not to Naruto, to the storm and the story both. Her map becomes a command. Ino, give me the convoy's pulses. Tenten, shift the left mirror 2 handspans. Tamari, cut the wind vertical and hold. Ino's link swings wide just enough. She puts the convoy on the network like you add new instruments to a song. Tenten yanks the staked rope, drags the mirror a handspan and a bit with pure refusal, and snaps the anchor down again. Tamari closes her fan and lifts her palm to the sky. The wind listens like a student being praised for the first time. It doesn't blow. It shears, an invisible wall running up from ground to cloud. A plane that convinces anything trying to cross to think again. Now, Hinata says, Naruto, 2 degrees right. Free one of the ghosts. He can't free a ghost. That isn't how war stories work. He goes anyway. Because Hinata's voice sounds like the correct answer you didn't know you deserved. He rides Temari's vertical wind like a stare, bounces off a flicker-padded strike from Ryuma that smacks his forearm numb, and lands inside the shield arc of one spectral hoplite. Up close the ghost isn't mist or light, it's memory dressed like a man, the echo of 1,000 drilled angles. Naruto gets his fingers under the rim of the imaginary shield. He doesn't pull. He gestures the way he did in the Tanner's burning hallway, the way he did to the dust in the labyrinth. He asks a line of motion to stop thinking about being locked. Come on, he breathes. You don't want this. The shield tilts. Just a hair. Enough for the shape behind it to see the man in front drop a spear. Ryuma's eyes flash. Not anger, heat. Naruto gives the spectral hoplite a direction, not a command. There, he says, turning his chin toward the null lancer whose leg is bleeding into the dirt in that wasteful way human bodies have. Guard him. The ghost obeys. It isn't magic. It's mercy given a vector in a system that didn't consider mercy a variable. The spectral shield plants next to the blinking, embarrassed lancer. The formation hiccups. It doesn't collapse, because the arithmetic is better than that. It adjusts, and in adjusting, it loosens. Push, Hinata says, voice low and fierce in a way that makes in. Ogrin and Tamari huff a laugh out through her nose. Now, Naruto uses the hoplite's moment of bewildered nobility like a wedge. Ryuma meets him with the kind of strike you save for men who earn it. And hits Naruto's aegis flicker hard enough that the world whites out for a heartbeat behind his ribs. He goes to a knee out of pure honesty. The spear point kisses his shoulder and misses muscle by the width of one of Tenten's hairpins. A hand catches his jacket and drags him behind the small cart with the bad wheel. Hinata. She plants him there with a firmness that doesn't ask if his pride is hungry. Blood runs down his sleeve in a line that will be dramatic later if anyone insists on framing it that way. Rain stings the skin just below the cut, like the weather is interested in the drama too. Stop trying to impress the storm, she says. She is angry and soft, and neither of those are for show. If I have to reattach your arm to prove a point about patience, I will do it with love and complain the whole time. He looks at her and then at the cart and then at the wagon lane he moved earlier because the wind told him who would push who into a rut, and he laughs exactly once. It hurts. You're right, he says. No flinch. No joke to deflect. He changes 3 things. He calls the convoy left into the wind where it's harder on the legs and easier on the eyes. He orders rescues first, not counterattacks. Anko and 2 clones to pull 3 fallen men off the arithmetic ladder. He tells Tamari to open the vertical shear for 3 counts so a bolt in the cloud will pick the now favored ground and try to reveal him. When it does, Tenten's triangle grabs it and buries it into the earth where it can talk to rocks instead of hearts. The fight tilts. Not a victory trumpet, a patient shift. The formation bleeds strength because men around it don't. Ino savages a seal lancer's attention with a scent of burned sugar just long enough to make him plant a pole in the shallow wrong place, where Anko's ink turns it into soup. Hinata maps a brawler's tenketsu with her eyes closed because it's raining in her face and she refuses to blink at the wrong time. She speaks into the link in counts that land like dots on a page. Tamari breathes and the wind sets itself apart from the thunder, grows precise. Tenten flips a mirror and a spear thrust glances off its own pride. Ryuma studies and learns. Of course he does. He's too good not to. He changes the rhythm of his men's footwork and the ghosts change with them, shields kneading together into a new shape that wants to be a net. He drives Naruto toward the line he set. Patient. Naruto lets him. He throws two clones into positions he hates. One obvious, one more obvious. The first dies to a textbook strike, the kind you film to teach children to be disciplined. The second dies ridiculous, tripping, swearing, grabbing at a knee. The third, because he made 3, and Ryuma knows men make 2 because 2 is tidy, slides under a shield and lifts, not to disarm. To make a gap through which the null courier can stick his whole dumb courage and pull a wounded man out by the collar. Ryuma laughs, sharp and bright. Good, he sass, and for a second he sounds like a man on a ridge with a coin and a view, not like a storm wearing boots. Enough, a voice says from behind Naruto's left shoulder. It is the voice of a man who has not sweat enough today to deserve an opinion. Konzo, the hot springs administrator, appears on the lip of a basalt rise with 4 null in formation and a device that looks like a monk decided to teach a harpoon to pray. He has the calm not of serenity but of someone walking along a solution they wrote themselves. The device hums a note the air doesn't want. Temari's wind goes wary. Tenten's seals all lift at their edges as if sniffing. Ino feels the smell of old copper and raw paper and something that tastes like unmaking. Hinata's eyes ache as if someone asked them to hold still long enough to be believed. Ryuma's gaze flickers at the thing and he smiles in a way Naruto doesn't like at all. Not pleasure, recognition. Konzo sets the device's base into a socket prepinned into the basalt like a plan laid last week. The spearhead isn't metal in any way a smith would respect. It's layered paper and lacquered wood and bound intaglio, seal inside seal, logic eating logic, tiny carefully inked teeth. Meant to bite what isn't supposed to have a throat. A string of prayer bells hangs from the shaft. They don't ring. They shiver. The prototype is ready, Konzo says to nobody and everybody. Stand clear. Ryuma lowers his spear in a gesture that looks like permission and is really a promise to watch closely. They think they can pin your patron, he says to Naruto, almost apologetic the way men apologize before introducing you to a relative you're not going to like. This will be instructive. Don't let him fire it, Hinata says, and the mind phalanx goes cold with how sure she is. Naruto hears the tilt in his bones go very quiet. It isn't fear, it's stillness, like a bird on a branch that has just noticed the cat. He steps, not toward Konzo, toward the null lancer Naruto sent out of the arithmetic with a ghost's shield. He drags the man back another pace and another until he's behind the line of the white ropes he set as the no cross. He doesn't look at Ryuma while he does it. Th is the new rule he made and he refuses to break it because a better story invited him. Konzo, Naruto says, finally facing the administrator. You fire that and you teach everyone here to love the wrong kind of certainty. Konzo's eyes are gentle the way river stones are gentle. You teach them to risk collapse for the hope of kindness, he says. We're simply different kinds of cowards. He lifts his hand, 2 fingers extended. And it's almost funny that the gesture echoes Ryuma's earlier hello. The device, the Godspear, though nobody has named it aloud yet, wakes up like a book learning to read itself. The seals along its shaft brighten without light. The air between the spearhead and Naruto thrums, and every hair on his arm stands up like a field at the wind's first ask. The hum in his chest, the one that's been a dog in the room since the shard woke, pulls in tight like a muscle before a hard climb. Temari slams wind between spear and target and the air buckles, but the spear's logic isn't air. Tenten flips a mirror and the spear's aim skips like a record, but only for a breath, because somebody thought about mirrors and wrote footnotes. Ino floods Konzo's sight with the mem. Ori of ascent from his childhood. River mud and lily stems and his mother's kitchen, anything to make his hand tremble. He doesn't flinch. Hinata braces her palms on the rope line and draws breath like a diver. Don't break, Ryuma says again in the kind of voice that sits beside you on a bench and doesn't touch you because it knows that would be rude. The spear releases. It doesn't fly, it resolves. Seal layers unwind in a posture like forward motion and arrive all at once in front of Naruto with a sound that is all bell and no ring. The Aegis flicker catches the first bite, skids, screams, dies without dying. The impact isn't a shove. It's a decision, and it touches not his skin or his bones but the relationship between himself and the hum. For a heartbeat he is less connected. The chi goes away like someone closing a door in a storm to keep the rugs from getting wet. In its place is a flat plane of what-ifs that don't lift, a world where beams fall and rooms eat sound and men who paste papers on doors get to feel tired instead of wrong. It is clean and dead. He does not scream. He does something worse. He looks at the people who will pay if he lets this stand. Ino, he says, and she hears the you of it more than the command. Put me in everyone's feet. She doesn't ask what that means. She drops her braid's pin and the mind phalanx widens until it becomes almost too much and then it isn't. A line runs from Naruto to Hinata to Temari to Tenten to Anko to the courier to the civilians to the uncertain null who decided to stand exactly on the line instead of on either side of it. It is not mind control. It is a choice to hum the same note for 1 second. Hands, Naruto says. Shoulders. All of you. Just. He doesn't finish a sentence because talking will make it a plea and he does not intend to beg. He steps back until his shoulders hit rope and then hit Hinata and then the cart and then Ino's shoulder and then Tenten's back and then Anko's ridiculous laugh press. Said like iron and then the courier's muttered oath about dying for something he can name. The civilians move without eloquence. A mother with her child in her arms, a man with a limp who once apprenticed as a smith. A girl with the mud-smeared nose. The null observer with the tidy hands who had been so careful about saying neutral looks at his fingers as if they belong to someone with a chance to be decent and then he puts his palm where a space exists. They make a wall out of being unwilling to be a wall. The spear's logic hits that shape and finds nothing to understand. It was written for a single line. Man to God, God to man. Cut here to cancel. It meets a chorus. The hum in Naruto's chest returns not as a gift from above but as an echo from around. Aegis flicker breaks and then comes back in pieces on 100 skins. Light does not burst. Bells do not ring. There is an absence where the world declines to obey a clever paragraph. The spear stutters. Konzo blinks for the first time. Temari bares her teeth and cuts a gust across the spear's angle and this time it means something. Tenten snaps a strap on one of her mirrors and it unrolls, becoming a disc on a hidden axle, a wheel S. He did not explain to anyone because explaining ruins surprises. It catches the spear's stubborn line and smears it. Anko's ink, which should be meaningless to a thing designed to eat gods, finds a say. I'm in the writing and crawls in like a snake under a door. Hinata speaks one number without any reason for it to be beautiful and the number is beautiful. The spear's tip shivers, skews, and looks suddenly ridiculous. A clever stick in a rainstorm, a sermon that forgot where it left its shoes. The pressure on Naruto's chest slips and then returns in a smaller shape, manageable, like a bad thought you can find the right reply to when you hear it out loud. For one beat the fight on both sides goes very quiet, not soundless, the quiet of people making new decisions because an old one failed to land as hard as they were promised. Ryuma's head tips, eyes half closed. Temari's breath leaves the way people exhale when a rope holds. Ino sags just enough to call it exercise. Tenten laughs the kind of quick, delighted laugh that is the only reward she needs for a tool doing something nobody asked it to do. Anko cleans her fingernails with a half-broken sigil stick because the moment is too heavy not to put a joke under it. Hinata leans more of her weight into Naruto's back and he leans into it and that's the whole poem. Konzo steadies. He does not throw a tantrum, which Naruto respects, reluctantly. Again, he says quietly to his team. His men raise new seals to recharge. It learns. So do we, Naruto says. Ryuma lifts his spear just so. It is not a threat, it is attention. You made mercy into a tactic, he says. And it worked. It was always one, Naruto says, and then he's moving again, because the next thing is always the next thing. They don't rush the spear. They erase its arithmetic. Anko trips a latch on the base with a wire loop and makes the anchoring ring decide it's a bracelet. Tenten kicks a chalk line nobody thought she'd seen. Temari does nothing dramatic at all. She simply keeps the wind holding the rope line just a little too alive for any neat geometry. Ino makes Konzo remember, for one heartbeat, what it felt like to be praised for something gentle. Hinata watches the sky go from gunmetal to something that admits to having colors it won't show yet, and she says, almost to herself, hold 2 breaths longer. They do. The moment moves through them, does what it was going to do. And becomes afterwards. Ryuma raises his spear and calls, without shouting, because shouting is a kind of fear. the retreat pattern that isn't retreat, the one that says we have what we came for, the looking. His men step back in time, shields swinging, ghosts dissolving like a good story set aside so it won't be wasted. He does not look disappointed. He looks like a black Smith taking a measure before the next strike. Konzo does not order the spear fired again. He doesn't need to. He has a conclusion to carry back to offices that like conclusions. He will call Naruto D. Angers with the weary civility of a clerk asking a god to please make an appointment. Naruto doesn't chase. He walks the line, gentle. He orders people he could give orders to without raising his voice. He sends a clone to fetch water. Another to gather dropped poles so nobody trips and turns a win into a tragedy. He thanks the courier by his name, which he learned. He tells a null lancer where his spearhead caught and shows him how to check the haft for hairline splits by feel. He touches the white rope, the line he drew, and nods to himself once because he kept it and the world didn't end. Hinata turns his sleeve to look at his shoulder. The cut is clean and mean. She presses a pad against it with a focus that could shame lightning. He makes a face that is mostly for her benefit. Tell me it looks cool, he says. It looks like you made a bad plan and then got lucky, she says without mercy. Hold still. Her thumb flicks the edge of the gauze so it seals just right. Her eyes soft, and by a degree he pretends not to notice because noticing would make something wobble he would rather keep steady. Don't do it again, she adds, because that's how you say I was afraid with dignity. I hear you, he says, and does. That sentence changes where he will stand next time in a way diagrams can't show. Tamari flips her fan half open and slides Naruto a glance that means she will eventually. Lee say something about him trying to die politely. He meets it with the kind of smirk that knows he has no defense and plans to become one. Tenten kicks one of her stakes to test the ground's memory F it and then hugs her mirror wheel like a child rescued from a river. Ino wraps an arm around Hinata's shoulder in a casual press and then lets go before Hinata has to decide if she wanted it to last. Ryuma skims his gaze over all of them and tucks a new note somewhere in the ledger in his head. He lifts his spear in the smallest salute Naruto has earned since he learned to call a tie a victory. And a victory a chance to change the next fight. One thing, Ryuma says, and the courtesy in it is a gift and a trap. Naruto says, like a man talking to a storm about whether now is a good time to plant. When we meet again, Ryuma says, I will not be embarrassed by your kindness. I will have algebra to match it. He turns away without waiting for an answer because he understands that so. Me things are better as promises to the air. The red banner curves and goes small against the far sky. Men become a line and then a suggestion and then a map someone else will draw wrong. The storm decides to move on and the thunder stops counting aloud and resumes thinking. The null don't leave. They cluster around the device and talk like rain on stone. One of them, not Konzo, the tidy-handed observer from the cart, looks at Naruto the way a decent man looks at a thing he can't approve of and still admires. He opens his mouth. He closes it. He picks up a coil of rope someone dropped and wind. It well because that's a kindness his hands know how to do. Konzo watches Naruto across the spear's base. For the first time since the barge, his tone permits the possibility that he doesn't enjoy being exactly who he is. You pulled people together, he says. We built a tool for ending singular arrogance and you answered with the opposite. He flattens a palm on the shaft, absorbing the texture. Of lacquer and paper and too much thinking. I will note this, he says. I don't expect it to change policy. It may change a sentence. Sometimes a sentence is the wedge that finds the gap, Naruto says. Konzo's eyes consider a future where that's true. The next version won't care how many shoulders you stand on, he says. It will call that mass. Then we'll be heavier, Tenten says from behind Naruto's left shoulder. Cheerful and dangerous. I have plans for that. Konzo almost smiles. Of course you do, he says, and steps away. The road has not gotten shorter. The land of iron is still an hour and a half and another argument distant. The convoy feels taller than when it started, not because it grew but because it didn't buckle. The oxen surprised themselves by not being exhausted. The girl with the mud nose asks Ino if she can learn to talk across air like that. Ino says yes in a way that means you just did. They move again. The plateau pretends to be simple and fails. Naruto walks beside the rope line with his fingers laced behind his head, breathing with a chest that remembers what it's for. Hinata matches his pace without choreography. Temari climbs the small rise to feel the wind's back where it relaxes. Tenten flips the mirror wheel flat and ties it under a cart with a knot that would make a sailor clap. Enko wanders the edge of the path, looking for the next plaque. Someone has tried to shape a narrative into a snare. The hum in Naruto's chest is quieter now, which does not mean less. It sits like a citizen in his ribs, not a tyrant. It has an opinion about Laurel and Olive both. It likes the way the rope line looked with all those hands. They crest the last of the tilted ground and see the iron banners ahead. Black and white, clean lines, a language that means, don't be clever, be correct. The guard post is stone with iron ribbing. The men there carry swords without argument. Steel watches them arrive. The courier steps forward and speaks a name that opens a gate. The guard captain answers with a mild insult to Konoha designed to test whether someone will rise. Naruto does not. He is tired and pleased and bloody and not here to be a tourist in someone else's code. He gives his name. He gives the shard a box. He gives the null a line they may not cross with papers without being asked. Inside, everything smells like oil, tea, and a philosophy about the right number of chairs. A messenger runs. Meetings will happen. Words like mandate, and neutrality, and instrument will be made to mean more or less depending on who buries them under tone. Tenten will find a forge and ask a smith for a favor and walk away with 3 plates and a wheel knuckle. She will turn into a thing nobody expects. Ino will charm a clerk into letting her see the room where Policy sleeps. Because she likes knowing what rooms look like in their pajamas. Temari will drink tea badly and make a friend anyway. Enko will leave a snake somewhere T can listen. Hinata NDS with Naruto on a balcony looking down at a practice yard where 2 samurai are doing the kind of slow work it takes a lifetime to respect. The rain, now that it has lost its job, drifts. The light opens enough to allow color back into things. You heard me, Hinata says, not a question, watching the swords. I did, he says. It is the kind of answer you can build a plan on. Good, she says, ND lets the silence that follows be comfortable. Down in the yard, a boy makes a mistake and his teacher corrects him without making his bones remember shame. The correction is so precise it almost hurts to watch. Naruto smiles, small. He can work with a place that likes that kind of correction. A bell rings low somewhere deeper inside the compound. Meetings begin. A scribe is sent looking for a bigger brush. Words make their own spear points. The null unload their device and lay it on a table with reverence that will be mistaken for love. Ryuma's men are gone from the plateau, which is different from being gone. Naruto rests his forearms on the stone parapet and scans the yard, and then beyond it, the road, the red coin heavy in his pocket, the wedge they made out of hands. The hum in his chest sits up when he remembers the shape of them, and falls quiet when he stops. He doesn't know yet how to make that shape again. He does know he will. He puts the word, again, in a place where he can find it later, not with desperation. With appetite. The owl comes at dusk, late, as if it had other errands. It doesn't land. It circles once over the iron courtyard, its shadow crossing no entry signs. Then lets the wind take it into a sky that doesn't know what it will become on the far side of night. Naruto looks up, watches it go, and then turns when a page comes to collect him for a room W. ITH too few chairs and shoulders that know steel. He goes to talk. He does not bring olive branches. He brings a map and a memory of hands on rope. Good enough for a first conversation. Outside the wall, on the edge of the plateau where the wind keeps a key nobody will admit exists, Konzo and his men steady the spear on a cart. The device sits meek and bright like a compliment that will eventually turn into a rule. Konzo looks once at the line of scuffed earth where people stood shoulder to shoulder. He notes it. He writes something careful in his head. He doesn't know yet whether he intends for it to help. Ryuma, somewhere beyond sight, explains to a circle of men how mercy can be turned into an engine. He is not gloating. He is doing arithmetic with his hands. The storm stacks itself on a new horizon. There will be more rain without apology. That's fine. They have mirrors and stories and a rope that remembers. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Spear and the Olive. Snow doesn't fall here so much as negotiate. It speaks in soft clauses that land on stone and melt or don't, depending on who argued last. The land of iron's inner keep is a ribbed thing of slate and iron bands, all right angles and right tempers. Men in layered armor move like they've practiced doing everything without hidden knives, which is its own trick. Tea is bitter and good. The corridors carry sound as if it's a duty, not gossip. Naruto stands with the regent on a balcony that faces a narrow valley. The valley has two roads, one official, wide and obvious, and one nobody admits to, a goat path that becomes a SM. Uggler path when the moon forgets her job. The Null have set posts at both. Their banners are polite, their ink precise. On a table between Naruto and the regent sit small iron tokens, carts, footmen. The outline of a spear made of nails bound together with twine. Evacuation lane here, Naruto says, moving a row of tokens to cut the valley into a shape that looks like war and doesn't feel like it. You'll say it's for civilians. And you'll be right. But also, he touches 3 places in a rhythm, it's a pressure valve. When the line wants to break by instinct, it will choose that corridor instead of the one that makes history embarrassing. The regent is not a woman who smiles because a young man is clever. She listens. There's a soft white scar along her jaw like a page underlined by a teacher who meant well. You were proposing an agreed cowardice, she says. I'm proposing a practiced compassion, he says. It's cheaper if we rehearse it. She glances at the tokens and then at the valley and then at him. We do not rehearse mercy here, she says, not cruelly. We practice it once. If it works, it becomes law. If it doesn't, we bury it correctly. He nods. He doesn't push. Then, give me one rehearsal and a law afterward. A courier arrives with a slate tablet and a brush. The regent writes 2 lines in crisp iron script and no flourish. Someone will carry those lines to a Te and shape a corridor out of men and snow. Naruto's shoulders drop a fraction, not out of relief, out of correct load. Below, in the Null's cordoned quarter, Anko sits on a low stool with a ledger O. Pen on her knees that doesn't belong to her. The tent around her is warmed by a brazier that smells like long meetings. The ink on the new Godspear's assembly schedule is tidy and smug. She taps the margin with a knuckle. Patient as a cat waiting for a hand to go where it shouldn't. 2 pages into the schedule is a thing nobody meant to show, a conditional string that reads like prophecy wearing a lab coat. If X is cited, Seal A primes. If Seal A primes while Y is true, Lock B becomes a certainty. Anko smiles because she hates inevitability, it looks so good in uniforms. She slides a length of inked cord from her sleeve, wraps it around her index finger, and writes a contradiction with the lazy authority of a bureaucrat filling in a date they intend to backfill later. When an orderly passes outside, she coughs, then laughs. Both are accurate. The cord slithers across the page, eats its own tail, and leaves a gap where a rule thought it lived. She doesn't stick around for applause. She folds the ledger shut, puts it on the correct shelf with the wrong spine showing, and leaves a tiny paper snake in the tent's peak to listen. Outside, she blends into the quarter without lowering her gaze. The guards don't stop her. People who are supposed to be there move like they own the ground. She moves like that. It's the easiest seal in the world. Tenten builds a wheel. She does it in AF. Orge that breathes like a very old man who loves his work enough to be annoyed when anyone interrupts it. The smith is a slab of patience with hands like river stones. He looks at Tenten's sketch and then at the steel plates she wants. And then he looks at her face. There's no smirk in his expression when he decides to help. If you break my anvil, he says, I will charge you double for the story. She laughs, quick and delighted. The Aegis wheel isn't new, she birthed a first version on the plateau and prayed with every turn. This one is bigger, smarter, mounted on a cart frame whose axle she rebuilt from a broken wagon knuckle. 3 mirror plates sit on pivots that catch and bleed force into each other like good gossip. The central hub is a ring of plates cut and recut until they can Lex half a finger's width without cracking. She tests the spin, frowns, adjusts, spins again, and this time the plates sing instead of sulking. She doesn't say, good. She grins like a thief. Hanada Bridge. Ings her tea she won't remember drinking. It reflects more than it returns now, Hinata says. Exactly. Tenten flicks a hinge, satisfied. If I can't change what hits it, I can at least make it go where it's less proud. Tamari walks the keep's top ridge where wind practices changing its mind. She speaks the air's language the way you learn a dialect by living with it, few words, good manners. He shapes a vertical shear over the valley with her palm, thin as a blade. She doesn't try to hold it constant, she lets the sky breathe through it. The trick, as with pride and swords, is not to sna. Ino tests a different line. She sits cross-legged in a storage room that smells of oil and starch and onions, with 2 strings in her hands tied to 2 door rings that don't open to the same hallway. You'll get 30 seconds, she tells Naruto when he stops by with a bowl of rice he'll finish in 4 bites. Maybe 35 if they're tired. If I link 2 commanders who don't want to listen, they'll hear feelings first. Words will come scrambled, you'll have to talk like you're halfway through a conversation you forgot to start. I'm good at that, he says. Who are you linking? She considers. Konzo, she says finally. Quiet, and the Iron Captain with the scar on his temple who pretends he doesn't taste the air before he steps. They will hate me, which is fine. Hatred is just attention with shame. Naruto snorts. Your bedside manner is improving. I'm saving the good stuff for later, she says, and then she closes her eyes to listen to a building's heartbeat. Konzo doesn't pace. He straightens. He checks seals. He has named the thing without naming it. He calls it instrument beta in the mint tone of men who like control. He touches the shaft with careful fingers the way a man touches a cliff to be certain it's rock, not salt. He has not slept well. It does not show. It lives in the way he blinks slow and then never again for 60 seconds. When Enko saunters past the tent opening, he does not follow her. Which is either wisdom or an admission that he can't afford to look interested in snakes. Ryuma arrives with 10 men and a wind he did not bring. He does not shout. He does not ask permission. His banner dips once at the gate like a swallow drinking and rises clean. The regent meets him in a court with no chairs. She will not ask a man like that to sit unleas. She intends to change him or marry him. He chooses the exact distance that reads as equal. The snow negotiates harder. You came, he says to Naruto, as if this were a social call and not a hinge. I like good rooms, Naruto says. You'll hate this one, Ryuma says, amused. It is not cruelty, it is fact. Talk lasts an hour and turns 3 words into 5 with every pass. Mandate, neutral, instrument, provocation, mercy. Nobody wins. They don't intend to. They map the ways in which they're going to fight. When it ends, the regent writes 2 more lines. Rooms rearrange themselves into purpose. Evacuations start at twilight. The lane Naruto cut. White rope, posted men, posted women, a runner with a bell, goes live. Old men with swords walk children like they are packages on loan from gods. A woman with a pitcher says quietly to Hinata, we will not shame ourselves by rushing. Hinata answers, we are not rushing, we are leaving early. This is the difference that saves people. Night arrives with no stars. The wind sees this and decides to be honest. They come before dawn, because dawn is proud and people like to interrupt it. Iron men snap to stations with the efficiency of habit. Enul set their device in a cradle on a low parapet. Ryuma's line unrolls along the south ridge, then splits and reforms and learns the ground as it goes. The ghosts, hoplites, drilled memories, whatever you want to call them, don't manifest as a trick of light this time. They stride onto the field at first contact like a thought that practiced in darkness. The gods, if any, keep their hands to themselves. Naruto sets the Aegis wheel on packed snow. Tenten makes 3 quick adjustments that nobody but her will recognize later as the difference between a bruise and a death. He palms the laurel coin from his pocket, looks at it, and puts it away. He pats the cedar box where the shard sleeps, not as if he seeks a boon, more like you would touch a lucky stone on your way out of a door you not sure you'll come back through today. He speaks to no altars. He speaks to his people. Same rules, he says. Rescue first. No crossing the white rope to earn a sentence in history. If you have to pick between a good punch and a good grip on someone who might fall, pick the grip. I don't care how good your punch is. Ino snorts. You'll hate yourself when that's a lesson someday. I hate myself weekly, he says. Mondays. He catches Hinata's eye, gets back a nod that feels like rain after stubborn sun. Tamari twirls the closed fan once, impatient and pleased. Enko bites a strip off so. Mething you're not supposed to bite strip off and grins with her teeth. Tenten kicks the wheel once like a drum. The drum likes it. Konzo lifts a hand. The Null's drum does not. They don't use drums. They use quiet. The Godspear, Beta, if we're being civil, hums like a book reading itself again. Ryuma pivots his spear so it rests across his shoulders like a yoke men choose, not a weight they hate. He looks at Naruto, at the rope line, at the evacuation lane where two girls are helping their grandfather walk. He chooses to wait 20 heartbeats before sending the first probe. Thank you, Naruto says to him, not loudly. Ryuma hears it and smiles without teeth. Wasteful to start a poem on the wrong line, he says. Then the fight starts being itself. The first pushes are polite. Men test one another's edges. Hinata calls Tenketsu in rhythm, quiet in the mind phalanx. Wrist, low, knee, now, like a conductor asking the brass not to overplay. She does not chant. She doesn't have to. The link carries the count. Ino rides the line between teams like a tightrope, tapping intent where a hand would be rude. Enko breaks two Null silence poles by whispering something nastier to them than there. Oninkan then disappears into the midline like a rumor you don't want to admit you started. Tamari throws a vertical shear that looks like nothing and is everything. Ropes shake without breaking. Tenten rolls the wheel into a notch between low stone and half-buried cart, locks it, and flexes the mirrors so they'll respond like birds, not doors. Ryuma steps as if a drum were inside him, patient. When he strikes, he does it with a generosity that means the blow will be fair and murderous. Naruto absorbs one kiss of spear on flicker and then another with a change of angle that feels like talking a table down from spilling wine. He doesn't chase Ryuma's attacks, he makes the field around them different. He calls, left 2. And 3 people move somebody who wants to fall left 2 steps. To a spot where the formation will hate to count him. He says, now, and a clone disappears under a shield to create a wedge that isn't for killing, it's for pulling. Mercy runs like a current. Men in red look confused in ways that will make them better in their next lives. The Godspear fires because of course it does. It doesn't fling itself. It resolves again, logic in forward posture, certainty for a tip. This time the layers are meaner. Whoever wrote the seal diagram got a good night's sleep and a raise. The field squeezes the hum in Naruto's ribs down to a coin. It feels personal and isn't. He hates it and does not waste time hating. He steps back into people again. He doesn't have to tell anyone what to do now, they already remember the shape. But he makes it bigger. You too, he says to the nearest iron captain, who looks offended and then puts his palm on a shoulder because offense is a poor use of an intelligent man. You as well, he says to the tidy-handed Null observer, W.H.O. stares at his fingers like they are about to sign their first good law and then nods once and moves. The civilians in the lane, those who haven't left yet, hang back in terror and decency, and then on. Woman with flower on her sleeve steps forward anyway and presses her hand against the rope without crossing it. Her palm makes a sound in his head he will hear later when he can afford to. A line goes up like a lantern lighting in fog. Not light, shape. The spear's certainty hits that shape and comes away confused. Tenten's wheel takes the rest, absorbs insult, spits it not back at people but into the stone at the foot of the wall. Where it dies of boredom. Enko's contradiction written in the assembly tent stutters awake. A check clause searches for its pair and finds a loop, eats itself for exactly the breath Hinata needs to speak. 2 more, into the link and lay numbers down like rails. The spear falters. Konzo swallows without telling his throat to. The regent on the balcony does not smile. Her hand tightens on the parapet. Just once, like you allow a horse its head for a stride in snow. Ryuma doesn't press the spear's moment. He is paying attention to a different arithmetic. The fury formation blooms anyway when men fall, because men always fall, and he makes use of it without leering. Naruto watches the ghost lines thicken and changes the win condition out loud. Rescue the red first, he calls. Just loud enough for the battlefield to overhear. Their wounded go out before ours if we can afford it. An Iron Captain chokes on the word afford and then orders his men to car. Why a red-cloaked soldier to the corridor anyway? It is not noble, it is expensive. The formation notices and dims by a hair you can't see until it stacks into a whole inch. Ryuma hears the call and laughs. And this time it sounds like a man who enjoys the weight of his own spear. "You cruel boy," he says across the field, amused and a little proud. "You're starving my engine. Change fuel," Naruto says. They crash again. Not brawl. Collision between plans that know what they like. Hinata's map goes wide and strange. She isn't just calling points. She's composing a field-wide Tenketsu portrait nobody trains for. Pressure points aren't dots to her, they're chords. She says, low, 3, break, hold, and a dozen bodies on both sides move with a grace they'll deny later out of embarrassment. Ari slices the sky's belly so a spectral shield line drifts a hair out of sync with the men behind it. That hair is everything. Tenten takes a spear meant for a boy without rank on a mirror and eats the shock with her legs, face red. Grin feral. Ino opens the link wider for 30 seconds and grabs two commanders by the back of their collars and shoves them into each other's throats, Konzo and the Iron Captain with the temple scar. The shock is pure. For half a minute Konzo tastes cold tea and boot oil and hears the captain's wife laugh at a joke he told poorly 12 winters ago, the captain smells old paper and recognizes the precise shape of exhaustion that lives between Konzo's eyebrows. Words come, scrambled, useless. Feelings land like stones in a bucket. It is ugly and gorgeous. Then Ino lets them go. The look they give each other across the snow is not fondness. It is recognition. That, too, matters. The spear tries again, because tools think repetition will eat a problem eventually. Enko's second contradiction is in place. It unhooks a timing gear in the logic stack. The spear stutters and, this is the heart of it, reverts to an earlier sentence. If target is singular, pin. If target is chorus, confuse. If confusion persists, default to containment. The spear's head blurs. The bells on the shaft shake without ringing. The device wants so much to be correct that it ties its own shoes together. Wheel. Tenten yells, and Naruto kicks the cart just as she throws her weight to pivot the hub. The mirrors catch. Not light, not chakra, the spear's hunger and bend it into the ground again. Stone whines. The smell of hot iron rolls up like a smith took a breath. Konzo barks a correction to his team in the same tone he must use to tell himself to be decent when nobody's watching. He does not order a third shot. He is not a fool. He is a man learning in public. Ryuma sees all of it. He cannot help it. He's built that way. He adjusts his line again, and this time he keeps glory out of it on purpose. He asks his men to be small and efficient and honest. The ghosts respond by becoming less beautiful and more dangerous. Naruto steps into him with no flourish and they trade. A sequence that would make swordmasters draw diagrams for a year. Ryuma crowds him, then gives him room, then takes it. Naruto breaks where pride would refuse. He backs up into a shape Hinata likes rather than try to win a note he doesn't need. You're learning cheap tricks, Ryuma says, pleased. I like tricks that buy lunches, Naruto says, and then he's inside Ryuma's guard for a beat that doesn't make sense on paper. He doesn't strike, he breathes. Do you want to win a story? He says, quiet, or bring more men home to tell one. Ryuma doesn't flinch at talk in the middle of the cut. He's got that kind of spine. He pushes Naruto off as a good teacher pushes a boy out of a stance he's about to love too much. Both, he says. Then watch this, Naruto says. He does the worst thing a field like this will allow. He refuses a duel that could be splendid and turns the entire battle into a rescue drill. Everyone is ordered to triage first, and since orders only matter if they're correct, he makes them correct by standing where they'd fail if they were wrong. He loses ground in the kind of way history books pretend is shameful and then call brilliant once the moral is clear. The formation thins. The ghosts look around for blood that isn't readily available. Men who should have died do not. Some do anyway. You cannot rewrite everything at once. Snow starts again, tiny clear notes on metal. The evacuation lane works. It isn't pretty. It's a bruise-colored corridor lined with rope and shaking hands. Men from both sides use it, not because they agree, they don't, but because they are. Yule on the ground is a religion you can follow even if you hate its hymns. In the last exchange, the god spear's base, under its polite lacquer and careful ink, fails. Not dramatically. A pin that not to shears because a contradictory order inside its logic made two smart parts argue about who owned a moment. Tenten hears the change in the hum and grins like she's about to win a game she likes better than fame. Got you, she says to nobody, and means everybody who tried to turn a paragraph into fate. Ryuma steps to center and calls the pattern he called on the plateau, not retreat, not rout. Intermission. He isn't ashamed. He's an artist who hates wasting good room on a bad audience. He lifts his spear to Naruto in a salute without self-pity. Konzo lowers his hand. The null men ease their shoulders. Some of them look at the rope line like it's a cousin they didn't know they wanted. The regent says nothing, and because she says nothing with immense skill, the keep breathes. After. The meetings are better than the ones before and worse than it feels like they should be. The regent's law about the evacuation corridor goes onto a slate that will become a rule people 50 years from now will assume the world invented by itself. The null's mandate does not dissolve. It bends. In public, Konzo argues for constraints with a tone that lets other men keep pride and concede ground. In private, he tells Naruto, quietly and without ceremony, I won't be promoted for that. Naruto says, I'll write you a note. Konzo says, it will be misplaced, and Naruto says, I know. And they both understand that decency is heavier when it shouldn't be. Ryuma doesn't attend the debrief. He sends a coin instead. Not laurel this time, olive. It is old and worn and soft about the edges, like it enjoyed pockets. Naruto turns it in his hand on a balcony that faces a courtyard where two boys are learning to draw their swords without looking at their feet. The coin sits against the laurel in his other pocket and the two metals decide to pretend to get along. Hinata finds him there and leans her forearms on the stone beside his, not close enough to spook him, close enough to matter. The snow is fine now. A dusting that makes the courtyard lanterns look like the world has decided to forgive itself for a minute. She doesn't say, you did well. She doesn't say, you scared me. She says, your shoulder. Still attached. He says, I followed instructions for once. You did, she says, and the small smile she doesn't bother to hide is a ridiculous gift no god can improve. They stand without the heaviness that usually collects in places like this after the shouting. There is weight, yes. It's honest. But the field below is full of men with breaths left to count, and the lane is empty. Which means it did exactly what it was supposed to. Tenten pushes the wheel back into the forge and tells the smith his knuckle lived. He nods as if she told him the weather will continue Obi weather and hands her a new hinge that he had no reason to make except that he wanted to see if it could be made. She pockets it and whistles off key. Tamari drinks bad tea conspicuously in a room. Where 3 iron officials can see her, and they dislike her for a quarter hour and then begin to like her because she keeps her back straight while doing a thing she openly hates. Ino walks 2 corridors with Konzo and says nothing and makes him remember how it feels when people say nothing. Enko you will not find. She is somewhere setting a snake to listen to a law learning to be decent. Naruto goes to a room with too few chairs and shoulders that know steel. He does not bring olive branches like a man who wants statues. He brings a map with a corridor drawn in chalk and a memory of hands on a rope. He says, we can do it again. Every sensible person in the room groans inside like the idea of practice is rude. Then the regent looks at the chalk line and writes 2 words on a slate, N.D. Everyone sighs because doing something once makes a myth, and twice makes a habit, and a habit is how you keep winter from eating all the chairs. That night, with the noise filed away and the rooms dim, he walks the inner wall because he needs to feel stone under his boots that isn't performing. Hinata finds him there without looking like she was looking, and they walk a measure in silence that doesn't need to be protected. He wants to say something about the way her hands made a map and the men listened, the way his chest filled when he felt the chorus hold, the way mercy felt like cleverness and not compromise. He doesn't. He will later. He lets his shoulder touch hers for exactly the distance between 2 crenellations and then he steps aside because you don't own a person you love, you make room for them. An owl crosses the courtyard. It doesn't land. It circles once where the rope had been, then flies on, its shadow slipping over iron, over slate, over the neat square where the odd spear sits covered like a dangerous altar set aside. The bird leaves no message. It never did. It witnesses. It's enough. In the morning, papers will be printed. Some will say a god touched shinobi, endangered a treaty town with trickery and sentiment. Others will say the null tested a weapon on a village that refused to panic correctly. A few will talk about a corridor of people and the way hand on a rope made a spear forget its words. Those will not be popular. That's fine. Naruto is not counting readers. He is counting rooms where the floor will hold because somebody asked nicely and someone else built a mirror. They leave the keep at noon under a sky that cannot decide whether it wants to brighten. The road runs thin and then full. The evac lane rope is coiled and hung in a storehouse where fools keep festival lights. Tenten tucks the new hinge into a pouch with the care you give seeds. Enko twirls a length of ink to make it spit once, like a snake that has learned manners. Tamar. I marks the wind with a small private gesture only she understands. Ino pockets a clerk's pen she will return later on purpose to make a friend. Hinata takes Naruto's hand when nobody is looking and then does not let go when someone is. The heat between palms is as ordinary as soup. It's the kind of ordinary that keeps countries. At the last turn, a boy stops them wide-eyed and says, "Is the spear gone?" Naruto crouches to the boy's height because he can. "No," he says, "but we taught it something it didn't know." The boy considers this as if tasting a new word. He nods. He runs back toward the courtyard with a story that will be wrong and useful. They take the road that leads away from iron and toward work. There will be more null. More papers on doors, more men who want to build instruments that tame fear by calling it policy. There will be Ryuma again, with algebra he promised. There will be Aegis and Laurel asking for different shapes at the same table. There will be lanes to cut, and ropes to hold and mirrors to polish until they stop wanting to be pretty and start wanting to be helpful. Naruto breathes, the hum under his breastbone hums back. It is not louder for victory. It is steadier for company. "We'll need more rope," he says. "Always," Hinata says. They walk. The owl is a speck already. The wind remembers their names without practicing. Somewhere behind them, a law is beginning to feel like it was always here. Somewhere ahead, a banner waits to be used without being worshipped. He chooses not to hurry and not to lag. He chooses the way a man chooses a footpath with space for two. Chapter 5 End.